Chapter 1446. Nero didn't know what Sensei Poulin or Mr. Grim Reaper in front of her took out. Her intuition told her that there was a strange power on the black cover of the book. Even as a black soul emissary, she felt that this strange power was strange to the point that even she felt it was strange. But this obviously wouldn't make Nero give up. Some temperaments had been cultivated for a long time, and they wouldn't really change overnight. Some of the extra temperaments she had now might have existed but had been concealed. Even she herself probably didn't know it. She just felt that it would make her feel comfortable. Maybe she also knew it, so she was more compliant and had always been interested in it. There was one thing that Sensei Poulin actually misunderstood. Nero liked to fight, not because she needed to fight as the reason for her existence, but because she really liked to fight. She really liked to fight. In this boring world that was about to wither, what could make people's blood boil more than fighting? It made people feel that they were not puppets in the unseen world, but there was a time when they resisted. After Nero became a Black Soul Envoy, she developed a special state for herself based on the characteristics of the Black Soul Envoys. It was because she regarded fighting as a source of happiness that she didn't care about it. At first, she developed the Yama transformation to use it to kill and hide it until she became a great sage. Since she was going to fight, and she met a strong opponent, of course it was better to be free and unrestrained. I hope you can let go of Joe's soul, because I don't like to use this power now. Sensei Poulin suddenly sighed. The ancient black cover opened in his palm at this time, which made Sensei Poulin's aura even more strange. If at the beginning, Teacher Poulin gave Nero the feeling of a quiet shepherd who wasn't very threatening, then at this moment, Teacher Poulin was like a hunter in the forest. Mr. Grim Reaper, are you an idiot? Nero didn't seem to have changed much even after being transformed into a Yama, at least in her tone. She blinked. Since it's my own power, why would I like to use it or not? Only children care about this kind of thing. Adults don't care, of course. I'll do whatever I want. Poulin smiled bitterly. In the end, he found that he really couldn't understand the thoughts of this white-haired girl. Maybe it was because he didn't have enough contact with her, or maybe she never made people understand her, so no matter who it was, they couldn't find a trace to understand her from some clues. I'll try to be careful, after all, I just want Joe back. That's all. As Teacher Poulin spoke, he removed his white glove and lightly pressed it on a certain page of the black book. Also, I'm not some Mr. Grim Reaper. Sensei Poulin moved, and after emphasizing something, Nero, who was transformed into a Yama, was definitely the type of person who was willing to strike first. She didn't try to talk about any rules with the other party at all. However, the battle that followed had obviously escalated to another level. Instead, it was surprisingly calm. There wasn't any earth-shattering momentum, nor was there any earth-shattering sound. It was like a gentle breeze. After escalating the level of the battle, it only took a few seconds for it to end. The result was that almost 70% of the blades that grew out of Nero's body after she transformed into a Yama devil had been shattered. In fact, there was a gaping wound from her left shoulder to the right side of her abdomen. The huge wound didn't heal quickly because there was a strange power entangling the wound that was madly preventing the Black Soul Envoy's self-healing ability from working. Nevertheless, Poulin's situation was worse. At least, he looked like a person who was really dying at this time. There were hundreds of cuts on his body. The black cover fell from his hand, and when it closed, it looked like one of the tattered magazines that could be packed away for 10 yuan in front of an old bookstore. It was so bad that one didn't even have the desire to pick it up. It seems that the strength is still not enough. At this time, Nero looked at the blade that was more than 70% broken after the Yama form transformation and muttered, "Sure enough, the boss is biased. When he was doing me, he cut corners. He wasn't as serious as when he was doing Das Appa. Sad. As if. Because the damage to Nero's body was too great, Yama had no choice but to be detached from Nero's body. It hummed twice as if it was complaining. Nero casually knocked the detached Yama on the ground twice as a warning. Then, she looked at Poulin, completely ignoring the wounds on her body. In fact, she knew how to use everything that was beneficial to her. For example, even if the Black Soul Messenger was really killed by someone, he could still be resurrected through the life lamp. From the beginning, she knew how to use souls as currency to buy various services from the club. This kind of nature even made Boss Luo think more than once that if everything was a game, Nero was indeed an experienced player. At this time, Poulin had already fallen to the ground. Nero walked over slowly and flipped Mr. Poulin's body over with Yama. The blue flame burning on Mr. Poulin's forehead had been extinguished. His eyes were closed as if he was in the state of death. After taking a few casual glances, Nero set her gaze on the black leather cover on the ground. Teacher Poulin was only able to forcibly break her Yama transformation because he used the power of this strange leather cover. Swallow it. Nero knocked Yamato on the ground twice again, like the worst capitalist exploiting his employees. Yama didn't mind. The shadow of its blade suddenly extended and wrapped the black cover on the ground. The shadow of the blade seemed to become a swamp, and the black cover sank into it little by little. What she didn't expect was that at this moment, a palm suddenly grabbed onto Nero's leg. The instant she reacted, Nero felt her body begin to spin. Soon after, she was ruthlessly smashed onto the ground. Teacher Poulin stood up once again. Wisps of mist emerged from the wound on his body that had been cut open by Nero's Yama transformation. At this moment, Teacher Poulin's hands were hanging low and his head was also hanging low. However, the feeling of danger he gave off was several times more intense than before. At the same time, Yama kept making buzzing sounds. The blade's shadow that was about to sink into the black cover even began to churn like boiling water. Finally, the blade's shadow shrank violently, and then the black cover came out directly. In other words, it had to spit out the black cover. At this moment, the black leather book that had been spat out directly flew in front of Teacher Poulin. His head was still lowered, but he had already extended his hand. This appearance was different from when he had cautiously flipped open this black leather book. This time, he flipped through it casually and efficiently. At this moment, the black-covered book floating in front of Teacher Poulin flipped open frantically. The rapidly flipping pages even made rustling sounds. Soon after, a long and narrow dark gray shadow shot out from the black-covered book. They were like snakes. In the face of this sudden attack, Nero frowned, because this snake-like long and narrow shadow was so fast that it made her feel like it was difficult to parry. She used all kinds of inhuman postures to dodge, but in the end she couldn't completely avoid the attack of these gray long and narrow shadows. In the end, her limbs were entangled by these strange long and narrow shadows. Finally, it was her neck. Nero was completely suspended in the air. Her body was pulled crazily as if it would be torn apart at any time. Yama was tightly entangled on the ground and couldn't move. This is not fun. Nero, whose neck was almost deformed, said with difficulty. However, at this time, Mr. Poulin seemed to hear nothing. He didn't make any move since he waved his hand to flip the black cover in front of him. But the body of the Black Soul Envoy was obviously not destroyed so easily. Nero's appearance was indeed bleak, but these long and narrow shadows couldn't really tear Nero apart for a while. Finally, a Teacher Poulin made a new move. He waved his hand once again, and once again, he flipped the black book. Fog. Because Teacher Poulin flipped the book, a large amount of black fog surged up in the surroundings. This fog brought death to everything. It did not have a fixed target, it simply brought death. Or perhaps it could be said that it targeted everything in the first place. This black fog was about to completely shroud the town's hospital. It had even spread more than 50 meters away, covering everything on the street. In the black fog, the pedestrians on the street fell one after another. The moment they fell, they even directly welcomed death. In this black fog, Nero's body even began to be eroded crazily. What was this mysterious force that could even erode the body of the Black Soul envoy? Maybe the boss will know. Should I call the parent like a child being bullied and then call the boss? Such an idea suddenly popped up in Nero's mind, and she almost didn't hesitate to implement this idea. If I can't win, I'll run. If I can win, I'll abuse. There's a parent. Isn't it stupid not to call the parent? Meow. While she was thinking about this, a small black cat slowly walked over in the thick fog of death. It didn't even die because of the power of the black fog of death. Instead, it looked abnormally energetic. This black cat came to Nero, who was being torn apart by the long and narrow shadows, and slowly raised its head. When Nero noticed the black cat's body began to grow bit by bit. It gradually turned into a human form, completing its transformation. Black suit and hat. It was another Mr. Poulin. Aren't you? Although she was surprised that the black cat finally turned into Mr. Poulin, Nero still recognized this guy. This was the guy she killed when she buried Yamato under Mr. Smith's house. Hey, handsome, can you do me a favor? Nero blinked and asked at this time. Her neck had been completely deformed by the strangulation at this time. The teacher Poulin in front of him, who was transformed from a black cat, silently glanced at Nero, but didn't pay her any attention. Instead, he turned around and looked at the Poulin, who was currently controlling the black-covered Poulin. He suddenly opened his hands. With his actions, the spreading black fog began to shrink little by little. In the end, the black fog of death began to return to the black book bit by bit. It even tore Nero's long and narrow shadow. Yamato was also released and returned to Nero's hand immediately. Nero still had the wound that almost split half of her body. It could be said that her whole body was cracked and half of her body was completely crooked. I'm so grateful. Nero looked at Mr. Poulin, who was transformed by the black cat, with a smile at this time. She indeed looked grateful. Otherwise, I almost called my parents. Mr. Poulin, who was transformed by the black cat, glanced at Nero indifferently and said coldly, "Then your parents will definitely feel ashamed to have a descendant like you." Nero blinked and suddenly said, "I'm looking forward to making my parents feel ashamed." "So, you two are in cahoots? Something like twins?" As she spoke, the Black Soul envoy, whose half-body was crooked, actually raised Yamato directly, not caring about the fact that the other party had helped her. Not caring about Nero's actions at this time, Mr. Poulin, who was transformed by the black cat, shook his head at this time. "He and I are not twins. We can be said to be the same." Nero scratched her head. "I don't study much." Teacher Poulin, who was transformed from the black cat, shook his head again. "To think that there's someone like you in the modern world who possesses such great power and is shameless to such an extent. Sure enough, the modern world has been distorted to an incomprehensible degree." "So?" Nero shrugged. Mr. Poulin, who was transformed by the black cat, slowly exhaled. He glanced at Poulin, who was still floating in front of him with the black book, and said faintly, "I'm the second-generation master of the underworld. You can call me Hades." Nero nodded and said seriously, "Actually, I have another nickname, Madwoman Zeus." "Are you serious? You are Hades?" Mr. Poulin, who was transformed by the black cat, or the one who called himself Hades, obviously didn't want to pay attention to Nero at this time, but his expression became a little more dignified. Because Poulin, who was controlling the black book, moved at this time. Hades said slowly, "He is going to be serious. He is also Hades, just like me." To Hades? Chapter 1447. Master of the Underworld, or Hades, King of the Underworld, believed that even ordinary people would not be unfamiliar with such a name, let alone Nero, who had been active in the modern world as a transcendent before becoming a Black Soul envoy. But as a transcendent, even if she had heard of the name Hades, she could only regard him as a legendary god. just as Nero teased herself from the beginning that she was Zeus the mad demon. But as a black soul envoy, Nero had obviously experienced a level far higher than when she was the divine general of the Michael Club. Naturally, her vision could not be compared with that day. "Are you really Hades?" Nero looked at the guy who called himself Hades in surprise. "Let's call this guy Old Ha for the time being," Nero thought. "I have no need to lie." The guy who called himself Hades. Old Ha's eyes were indifferent at this time. He locked his eyes on Poulin, who was controlling the black book. "Let's call this teacher Poulin Husky for the time being," Nero thought. Although she was not very clear about the real relationship between Old Ha and Husky, in the current situation, she could temporarily join forces with Old Ha to deal with Husky. Nero's idea had always been very simple. If she could win, she would definitely fight. If she couldn't win, she would call her parents. But if she couldn't win, she would definitely lose points. She was naturally not afraid of such an operation. The key was that the maid, who was the manager of the Black Soul Envoy, caught her weakness. The consequences were naturally very surprise. "Old Ha, I'm fine. Let's kill Husky together." Nero suddenly put her hand on Old Ha's shoulder and said, "The guy who called himself Hades." Old Ha was stunned. He didn't even realize when the other party approached him. Even the wound on Nero's body had disappeared at this time. From the time she escaped to now, it had only been such a short time. She actually healed the injury caused by the book? "You are okay?" Old Ha couldn't help but frown slightly. He looked a little incredulous. At the same time, he also wanted to confirm it. "I'm fine." Nero swung her arm, then shrugged. "I just haven't adapted to it all of a sudden." "You said adapt?" Old Ha couldn't help but frown. "Whether it was intentional or not," Nero said casually, "it seems that my master used some kind of material that can be immune to most attacks when he made me." "So that book, his attack is beyond your immunity?" Old Ha nodded. She said, "Her master?" "At first, yes, but it's fine now." Nero narrowed her eyes and said, "This kind of damage has already landed on my body. When facing the same attack next, my resistance will increase, and my self-healing ability will not be suppressed." Old Ha. Although Hades still looked calm at this time, his heart had been stirred up. He was not clear about the origin of this white-haired girl, and there was not a single record of such a strange thing in the inheritance he had obtained. Her self-healing ability was no longer suppressed by that book. That book was, "If it's really like what you said, then your master is indeed a great existence to be able to create you in such a perfect state." Facts spoke louder than words. Old Ha saw Nero from being seriously injured to being fine with his own eyes. He knew the essence of the book cover controlled by the Husky. Therefore, for the master who could create a monster like Nero, he naturally had a subconscious admiration and a trace of fear. "Would I be afraid of a guy I have never seen before?" Old Ha. Hades was still calm at this moment, but the waves in his heart had been stirred up again. "My master is great. I absolutely agree with this," Nero said with a smile, "but you are wrong about one thing. I am not perfect. Among the same type, I can only be regarded as a defective product at most." Old Ha Appa, defective product. Old Ha's brows suddenly twitched. His heart was stirred up again. His emotions had fluctuated several times during this period of time, and it was all because of the white-haired girl's words, "What is your master? If my master wants to see you, you will see him immediately. If you want to see my master, you can also see him when you really need it." Nero chuckled at this time. "Of course there is a third way." Hades frowned and said, "What other way?" The first method was very unreliable in his opinion, and there were many uncertain factors. The second method was even more ridiculous, but he felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't say it. "The third way, of course, is to bribe me," Nero said with a cheeky smile. "I can take you to see my master at any time." Hades snorted softly, knowing that he was fooled by the white-haired girl. He should concentrate on dealing with Poulin, the husky who was controlling the book cover. But the strange thing was that he had been talking with Nero for a while, at least a few minutes had passed, but the husky had not made any moves so far. He had already judged from the beginning that the husky was going to be serious. Wait, what is that? Hades's eyes suddenly shrank because he finally found the reason why the husky had been on the verge of exploding, but still did not move. Something had trapped the husky. A knife. Yamato had appeared behind Poulin-sensei, and the shadow of Poulin-sensei was directly inserted into the knife. This was the real reason why Poulin-sensei had not moved so far, like a puppet, and could only let Nero and Hades communicate with each other. After knowing all this, Hades suddenly looked back at Nero. Actually, I don't need to do anything, you can get out of danger by yourself, right? Nero shrugged and said, when I fought with the husky on the other side, I really fought until I was half dead. So, what is the relationship between you and the husky? Hades muttered to himself for a while. Taking advantage of the fact that Teacher Poulin's shadow was nailed to the ground by the Yama knife and was unable to move, he walked directly to the front of Teacher Poulin. He stretched out his hand and gently pressed against Teacher Poulin's forehead. The weirdness of Poulin-sensei began to fade away. In Nero's opinion, it was like some kind of seal had been added. She watched curiously. Poulin-sensei gradually returned to normal, and finally fell asleep on the ground. As for the strange black book, it lay quietly beside Poulin-sensei. What was curious was that Hades did not intend to take the book at this time. Well, you don't want to take this book as a trophy? Nero couldn't help but ask curiously. At this time, she squatted beside Poulin-sensei and stretched out her finger to poke the face of Poulin-sensei, who had returned to his original appearance. Only he can use Devil Bible. Even if others get it, it is just a useless book. Hades said indifferently, what's the difference between taking it away or not? Nero blinked and said, well, he can't use it if he takes it away. If I can't use it, I can't let him use it. And? Hades couldn't find a word to refute. Am I right? Seeing that this guy who claimed to be Hades had no idea, Nero's face suddenly showed a smirk. She directly reached out and picked up the book beside Poulin-sensei, or rather, she took it into her hands. Although Yamato tried to swallow this strange book and failed, it didn't seem to resist the touch of others. But as Hades said, it seemed that no one could use this book except for Sensei Poulin-sensei. Hades probably knew this result, so he didn't stop Nero at this time. His idea seemed to be more inclined to let Nero take this book away quietly. Will this guy still be like that in the future? After getting the book, Nero, who was extremely thick-skinned, patted the Sensei Poulin-sensei's cheek. In fact, I still like this big brother. He is really strong and unforgettable. Why are you so hostile towards him? Hades was silent for a moment. Then, he suddenly asked, I know him very well, so I know that unless it's something too overboard, he won't take the initiative to attack, much less risk using the power of that book. You even made that fellow inside his body appear. The guy in my body? Nero knocked her head with the handle of Yamato. Are you saying that the guy in his body is the real husky? I mean, you mean the guy like you? Hades said indifferently, I'm asking you. Yo, I've decided. Nero suddenly stood up. Her eyes narrowed, and her figure disappeared in an instant. Hades frowned and felt a crisis coming from behind. But he found that his body was unable to move for a while. He remembered the scene where Sensei Poulin's shadow was nailed by Yamato. Obviously, he also suffered the same treatment at this moment. What do you want to do? Hades frowned. Even if his body couldn't move at this time, he still looked quite calm. Nero was almost sticking to Hades's back at this time. She whispered softly behind his ear, Hades Appa, I'm really interested in you. Tell me what's going on with you too, okay? I can do shameful things with you, what if I don't want to? Nero said with a smile, Then I won't even give you a chance to buy time. I'll kill you directly. Don't you have any dignity of a strong person? Hades shook his head. Nero went beyond the so-called boundary of shamelessness and said without dignity, "Because I'm now a puppy raised by my master, don't move. If you move again, I'll really cut you. You see, the husky was also cut down by me before, right?" Hades said indifferently, "What do you want to know? What's going on between you two?" Nero went straight to the point. "Also, why do you say that you are the second master of the underworld?" "Because the first master is dead," Hades said slowly. "Since the first master is dead, then as the successor, I naturally automatically become the second master. It's that simple." "Oh, that seems to be the case. Oh, then this question doesn't count. Please answer my first question." "He and I both have a part of the power of the original master of the underworld." Hades thought for a while and said, "That is, in the myths, the power of the master of the underworld, Hades. You're right, he is indeed the brother of the king of the sky, the master of the underworld, Hades. Well, let's not talk about the authenticity of the underworld first. What I'm more curious about is why this power fell into the hands of the two of you separately, and why do you look so similar? Although at first glance, Hades and Teacher Poulin did seem to be printed from the same mold, but if one looked carefully, one could still distinguish many subtle differences between the two." Hades said indifferently, "Because we have the same parents and have the same blood relationship, it's natural to look a little alike. Isn't that normal? Brother, a brother who obtained the power of the master of the underworld at the same time." Nero blew in Hades's ear at this moment. "Oh, Appa, the story you just made up is really bad. It's not fun anymore." She pulled out her Yamato and noiselessly pierced through Hades's back. She naturally didn't think that she could kill him so easily, but she also wanted to see what was the difference between this fellow, who also possessed the power of the master of the underworld, and Teacher Poulin. Nero naturally did not believe what Hades had just said. Compared to the story of brothers who obtained the power of the master of the underworld at the same time, she believed that this was a situation caused by the division of the divine titles of the gods in the legends. Yamato had already devoured part of Teacher Poulin at the beginning. After a period of jokes, some information about Teacher Poulin had been deconstructed from the devoured part. "Have you always been like this? Do you like to make a move suddenly?" After being stabbed in the body, Hades slowly exhaled at this time. He didn't even get angry. He just walked forward and walked out of the piercing of Yamato. There was no injury on his body. "Generally speaking, I always prefer to correct the dishonest brats directly with my fists." Nero carried Yamato on her shoulder. "For example, someone like you." Hades was silent for a moment. "When did you find out, Joe?" Nero raised the Yamato in her hand and pointed directly at Hades. "Oh, what's wrong with you, kid?" Chapter 1448. Faced with Nero's question, Hades did not deny it directly, which was equivalent to affirmation. At least Nero could take it that way. "Well, is that true?" But Nero was surprised after getting this affirmation. She let go of Yamato and let it pin Hades's shadow. Then she walked to him and looked at him carefully. Hades became calm at this time. Nero suddenly stretched out her hands, pinched Hades's cheeks, and then pulled. "You still like to bully me, big sister." Hearing this, Nero looked as if she had seen a ghost. She jumped back and stared at Hades with a suspicious look. She was not sure, so she asked hesitantly, "Are you really Joe?" He nodded slowly. "Big sister, I haven't seen you for a long time. Your name is Nero, right?" Nero's eyes became sharp in an instant. She quickly observed her surroundings as if she was trying to distinguish something. She remembered that she had never formally introduced herself before. Whether it was when he was with Little Joe or when he was fighting with Silly Husky, he had never exposed his identity. The fact that little Joe was able to identify him so quickly was most likely due to some ability that could distort his mind, or perhaps he had already known about it through some other means. Of course, there was another possibility, that was, he already knew it. Already knew it? How do you know my name? Nero asked expressionlessly. Of course, you told me yourself. Hades looked into Nero's eyes when he said this, and the conviction and sincerity in his eyes were what Nero was most resistant to. She frowned. I don't remember introducing myself. I even suspect that I have fallen into your trap from the beginning, but I didn't realize it. You did tell me yourself, at that time. Hades shook his head slowly. You know, big sister, Mr. Death took me away in the end. What did you say? Nero looked up suddenly, but the shadow of Hades in front of her was gradually fading away. Yamato. Seeing this, Nero let out a low cry. Yamato, which nailed Hades's shadow, began to tremble in an instant. A strange red light flowed on the blade. But even so, it could not stop Hades from disappearing, leaving. Where Yama was inserted into the floor, there was no more shadow. Nero walked to Yama and reached out to pick it up, standing with a puzzled expression. After a while, Nero looked back at Miss Poulin, who was lying on the ground. She was thinking about something. Suddenly, Nero picked up Joe's body that had been thrown on the ground. Then, she reached into her body and pulled out a white, fist-sized ball of light. She rubbed the ball of light on her clothes a few times before stuffing it into Joe's body. Then, she turned into the size of a mosquito and flew into Joe's collar. At the same time, Yamato turned into a wisp of black smoke and disappeared. She waited like this until Teacher Poulin slowly woke up. After Teacher Poulin got up shakily, there was a perplexed look in his eyes. He looked around in a perplexed manner, and after a while, he gently rubbed his forehead. At the same time, Teacher Poulin also saw Joe lying motionless on the ground. He quickly walked to Joe's side and subconsciously reached out his hand, only to find that the gloves had been taken off during the battle. He hesitated for a moment, then hurriedly put on the white gloves, and only then did he carry Joe. Looking at Joe, who had regained his life, Teacher Poulin seemed to sigh in relief. He remained silent. At this moment, he didn't even care that the black leather cover had disappeared. When Joe's eyelids twitched as if he could wake up at any time, Teacher Poulin quickly carried Joe into the town hospital. At this moment, because Teacher Poulin had entered the state earlier on, triggering the power of the Devil's Bible and causing a large number of deaths, in the hospital, regardless of whether they were preparing for treatment or the busy doctors and nurses, all fell to the ground one after another. However, their life force was also recovering, and he believed that they would be able to wake up very soon. Teacher Poulin glanced left and right. He knew that he was the one who had caused this situation, but he didn't know what had caused everything here to return to its original state. Was it that white-haired girl? The Devil's Bible that accompanied me must have been taken away by that mysterious white-haired girl, right? Teacher Poulin lowered his head and pondered for a moment. Finally, he put Joe on the seat in the hospital lobby. He silently looked at Joe's face. Suddenly, Teacher Poulin stretched out his hand and directly grasped Joe's neck with a little force. His fingers had even felt the bones in Joe's neck. He was even sure that if he used a little more force, Joe's throat could be crushed. A child's body was always so fragile. When Teacher Poulin finally released his hand, he looked at Joe and stepped back little by little, finally disappearing in front of the hospital door. At this time, someone came. It was a policeman. The policeman found Joe lying on the chair. After a few glances, he was surprised to find that this was the child that Mr. Smith reported missing. Strange, why did he run to this place and fall asleep by himself? In the hospital's operating room, the doctors and nurses suddenly recovered. The doctor even found that he didn't know when he fell to the ground. He raised his head and glanced at the operating table above him. Suddenly, he broke out in a cold sweat. He was currently performing an extremely important operation on Mrs. Deborah. Any slight deviation could lead to Mrs. Deborah's death. But what surprised the doctor and even the nurses who woke up was that Mrs. Deborah's condition seemed to be improving. At least it didn't look like the operation would fail even if it failed. What the hell is going on? At this time, the operating room light was still on. Mr. Smith and Mrs. Allura were still waiting anxiously in the corridor outside. At this time, it was already past midnight. It was 12:30 midnight. At this time, Mr. Smith suddenly heard some kind of sound like the sound of breathing, but also like the sound of talking. It murmured in his ear, making him feel at a loss. Looking at the number on the mobile phone screen that would jump every minute, Mr. Smith felt that time was so long for the second time. It reminded him of the first time he had this feeling. At that time, he also looked at the time on the mobile phone like this. At that time, his body was completely pressed on the overturned car, and his legs were tightly pressed. He couldn't get away at all. He looked at the time on the mobile phone, painfully and helplessly asking for help. This was because his mother, Lady Allura, was in the car at that time. Her head was bleeding profusely, and she had fainted. Deborah's lower body was bleeding profusely due to the violent impact. He knew that his wife had a difficult birth. As for his son Joe, his neck was entangled by the deformed seatbelt due to the violent impact. He could even clearly see Joe's face that seemed to have turned purple. When Mr. Smith woke up again, he was already in the hospital bed. Hearing from the doctor that someone drove by, he quickly called the police and the ambulance. Because of the timely rescue, Mr. Smith's family miraculously survived, and Mrs. Deborah's second fetus was finally saved. "Mother, do you remember when we woke up in the hospital half a year ago?" Mr. Smith suddenly asked. Mrs. Allura was startled at first, and then grasped Mr. Smith's arm tightly. She thought that Mr. Smith intended to comfort her in this way. "Of course I remember. I think I will never forget it in my life. Don't worry, Deborah will be fine." Mr. Smith shook his head at this time. "I mean, did you hear any sound at that time, as if someone was talking to us? In fact, when we were in the hospital, had we already discussed this topic?" "I remember now, there was such a thing." Mrs. Allura was startled. "But later, I forgot. Is there anything, Mr. Smith?" "I remember the doctor said that it was just an auditory hallucination because of the serious injury." "I heard it." Mr. Smith took a deep breath at this time. "I heard that voice again." Mrs. Allura could not help but be startled, and then held her son's hand tightly. She did not say that she saw a black cat. But she knew what the black cat she saw was, because she was already at this age. People at this age could actually feel things. Mrs. Allura also believed that in this hospital, some people who were about to die would be as sensitive as her. "It's okay, it's okay." Mrs. Allura softly comforted Mr. Smith, as if comforting herself. She looked at the operating light that was still on, and whispered in a low voice, "It's okay. Sir, look, is this your lost child? We found him sleeping in a chair in the hospital lobby." 2 policemen came slowly at this time, and one of the doctors was still holding the sleeping Joe in his arms. Mr. Smith suddenly stood up. This was probably the only thing that could make people feel at ease in this terrible night. "They are out." Mrs. Allura suddenly let out an anxious voice. The light outside the operating room suddenly turned green, and then not long after, the chief surgeon came out of the operating room. He took off his mask and looked quite tired. Mr. Smith and Mrs. Allura came forward at once, and the doctor said seriously, "The patient's condition is temporarily stable. We have done our best, and the operation is considered a success. The next step is up to the patient herself." "What the hell is this?" Mr. Smith grasped the doctor's arm tightly. The doctor said helplessly, "The operation was successful, but the patient is not out of danger. Now it's up to the patient's will to live. The patient will be transferred to the intensive care unit later. You can go and see her." This was obviously not good news, and Mrs. Allura suddenly leaned on Mr. Smith's chest, and her face became pale. Later, when Mrs. Deborah was sent out of the operating room, the two followed her until she was transferred to the intensive care unit. As for the rest, of course, no one mentioned it, only Joe was still sleeping soundly. But Mr. Smith could no longer hear the voice outside the operating room. He helplessly looked at his wife Deborah, who was in a coma because of the anesthetic through the glass. At this time, a reflection flashed across the glass, and Mr. Smith suddenly shivered. He turned around but saw nothing. However, the reflection that flashed across the glass seemed to be a black cat. Mosquitoes flew leisurely in the night sky like a chaotic line. On the ground, Mr. Poulin, who had put on his white gloves again, was still alone. When he came to a traffic light, he chose to stop. This was a green light and he should go over. In fact, just half a day ago, an old man fell down in front of this traffic light, and died before the ambulance arrived. Teacher Poulin stood there silently as the traffic lights changed again and again. If it weren't for the fact that it was already late at night, he would have probably been treated as a weirdo standing there like this, right? In the night sky, the mosquitoes had been flying around for a long time, and finally, it had to stop above the streetlight, lying there in boredom. Until Mr. Poulin took another step, it flew up again like a sick person, making a hateful buzzing sound, and followed Mr. Poulin. Mr. Poulin did not seem to notice that something was following him, and continued to walk slowly like this. He looked exhausted, and his walking speed became slower and slower. After a long time, Mr. Poulin suddenly stopped. At this time, he came to a very old house. In fact, this house was not only old, it even looked like no one had lived here for a long time. Teacher Poulin walked in front of the room's door and gave it a light push. After the door let out a terrifying creak, it opened and an old smell followed. Indeed, no one had lived here for a very long time. Debris was piled all around, but there were extremely clear footprints on the ground. The mosquito also flew into the room, but Teacher Poulin still didn't discover it. His body became increasingly stooped, so much so that he was already unable to walk. He had no choice but to support himself against the wall. In the end, he came to a sofa whose skin had already been bitten into tatters by insects. He fell into a deep sleep the moment his head touched the ground. Chapter 1449. In the streets of the town at night, the black cat walked on the street, sometimes disappearing, sometimes appearing like a wandering ghost. It came to Mr. Smith's restaurant. The restaurant was already closed and the lights were turned off. At this time, Mr. Smith was still in the hospital, accompanying his wife, who was in the intensive care unit. The black cat jumped on the windowsill of the restaurant and looked inside. After a while, it jumped down from the windowsill and walked in the quiet town in the middle of the night again. It walked past the small park at the corner of the street, stopped for a while, and then continued to walk. Its tail was gently wagging. As it walked, it stopped beside a homeless man who was sleeping in an alley. When it arrived, a rat immediately took out a rat from the homeless man's clothes and ran away. In the blink of an eye, the rat had disappeared along the sewer. It didn't care about the fleeing mouse, but gently jumped on the homeless man's chest. Squatting on his chest, it silently looked at the homeless man's face. Wind and frost, unkempt beard, wrinkles, and a body temperature that was dropping little by little. The homeless man's life was about to come to an end about half an hour ago. Its tail was still wagging, gently touching the tramp's body as if it was caressing him. Finally, when the temperature of the tramp's body finally ran out and became cold, it jumped down from the tramp's chest. When it left, the black cat's tail swept across the homeless man's forehead. The tail curled up like a hook and hooked something out. It was a gray ball of light. It put the hooked ball of light into its mouth and then ate it in small bites. It was like a child shopping with snacks in its hand. It continued to walk on its own again. Finally, it finished this walk and stopped in front of a house. This was Mr. Smith's house, but there was no light in the house at this time. It jumped over the iron gate and walked to the door of the house. The black cat's body began to grow and gradually became a human. Hades was wearing a black suit. Hades stood in front of Mr. Smith's door, adjusted his bow tie, cleared his throat, and gently knocked on Mr. Smith's door. Of course, no one answered because Mr. Smith's family was in the hospital at this time. He knew that even if he knocked for an hour or two, no one would open the door for him. He knew that, so he knocked on the door like this. He knew. After that, he no longer knocked on the door. Instead, he stepped back and went down the stairs. Then, he moved the small flower pot on the third step of the stairs and put his hand under the stairs. He finally took out a key. He opened the door, entered the house, closed the door. He did not turn on the light. He could see everything in the dark. He actually wanted to turn on the lights. Perhaps it would be good to turn on the lights. He walked slowly to the living room and walked around the sofa before sitting down. He straightened his back and placed his hands on his thighs as he looked around the living room. A blanket casually scattered on the sofa attracted his attention at once. He took the blanket and wrapped it around himself. He continued to look around. His eyes soon saw the dining table and the kitchen in front of him. He stood up at once and walked over with the blanket wrapped around him. There was still the dinner that Mrs. Allura had prepared for Mrs. Deborah on the stove, but it was probably too late to deal with it when the ambulance came, so she simply turned off the fire and left it there. He opened the lid of the pot. It was borscht. Obviously, it was cold. His eyes lit up. He looked around and then took a step back. He pulled open the disinfection cabinet under the stove and took out a spoon. At this time, he, who called himself Hades, picked up the pot on the stove and sat at the dining table. He used the spoon in his hand to eat the cold borscht in the pot. Mrs. Allura was of Russian descent, so she usually liked to use red vegetables to make borscht. He ate and ate until he finally put down the spoon, picked up the pot, and drank the rest of the soup. Don't eat so fast. Your mouth is full. Raise your head, Mom will wipe it for you. He suddenly raised his head and even closed his eyes, as if he was waiting for something, but he didn't see it. He opened his eyes and then slowly exhaled. He picked up a tissue and wiped the soup off his mouth. He stood up again and walked up the stairs. After a while, he came to the door of a room. This was Joe's room. He opened the door and went straight into Joe's room. He came to the 1-2-meter child bed and turned on the small table lamp on the bedside cabinet. He lay down, wrapped in the blanket, pulled a cup over his body, and then curled up and fell asleep. Then he reached out and turned off the small table lamp. He whispered, "Good night." Then there was silence. The next day came quickly. In this dilapidated house, at the first moment when the sun rose and the light shone into the house through the gap, Mr. Poulin slowly opened his eyes. He didn't look tired anymore. He just got up silently, walked to the bathroom in the house, turned on the rusty faucet, and simply freshened himself up. "Thank you for accompanying me for the night." After freshening up, Mr. Poulin looked at the mirror, and said somewhere in the mirror. A small mosquito flew down from the door beam, and then turned into Nero. "Morning, little brother," she casually leaned against the door, rubbing the somewhat messy bangs on her forehead while sizing up Teacher Poulin. Then, she put on a smiling face and stretched out her hand. "Overnight fee, Ching Hui 100 yuan. Mr. Poulin slowly turned around and said indifferently, "I don't have money and I can't think of what you need money for." Nero squinted and smiled, "Because there is an unscrupulous director who squeezes work and doesn't pay salary, so I can be said to be very poor." Mr. Poulin shook his head. "You have taken away my book." Nero looked at his eyes and suddenly asked, "Do you recognize me?" Mr. Poulin felt a little surprised, and then said, "Of course I recognize you. I don't think my memory is so bad. After all, we have met for the third time in these 2 days. Why do you ask?" "The first time was in the abandoned warehouse, the second time was in front of the hospital last night, and now it was the third time." Nero's mind quickly flashed the scenes of these 3 meetings. She suddenly held her heart with a pitiful look. Do you really not remember me? When you watched the moon with me when we were young, you called me big sister, little sweetheart, and said you would protect me for a lifetime. Did you recognize the wrong person? Mr. Pulley opened his mouth. Until this time, he finally confirmed that he really didn't know this white-haired girl. She had many sides, and each side was her, so he had been unable to shake her with simple words. At the same time, he also mocked himself that he still didn't know enough about people, but originally this white-haired girl could no longer be defined by people. You really don't know me? Nero suddenly walked in front of Mr. Poulin and looked at him with her head tilted. Mr. Poulin gently exhaled and said, I have a complete memory from childhood to now, and I am sure that I have not forgotten anything, so it is impossible for me to know you. You are lying. Nero suddenly whispered, You are describing a fact in a lie. Teacher Poulin took a step back slightly, widening the distance between him and Nero. He used the same tone as when Nero first met him and said, If you think it's like this, then so be it. I have nothing to say. But I still hope you will not approach Mr. Smith's family again. So what if I approach them? Nero suddenly sneered. I can kill you once, and naturally, I can kill you a second time. And this time, your book is still in my hand. Are you talking about it? Unexpectedly, Mr. Poulin casually raised his palm at this time, and a black book with a black cover appeared in his palm instantly. Nero was stunned and blinked subconsciously. Then she inserted her palm into her body and began to search randomly. After searching for a while, she couldn't help but be surprised. Hey, it's really gone. Nothing, I'm going out. Mr. Poulin shook his head. If you like to follow me, then follow me, but it's better not to become a mosquito. He walked past Nero and was about to go out. Nero suddenly whispered at this time, Hades. At the same time, she was also observing Mr. Poulin's reaction. She found that Mr. Poulin did react to this name, but it was just an unexpected reaction. Mr. Poulin turned around and asked curiously, Hades? Are you talking about the king of Hades of the Greek god system? Why did you suddenly mention this name? Nero shrugged and said, Don't you feel similar? Your ability is just like Hades. Mr. Poulin was silent for a moment. Maybe. It is also the ability to bring death, but I am not. I just said that you are similar, but I didn't say that you are. Nero smiled casually. Mr. Poulin nodded and then went out. He didn't continue to talk too much with Nero. Some things couldn't be solved by pure force. Moreover, since he even used that book, if the result was still like this in the end, naturally, it couldn't be solved by force. If she kept following him, maybe it was a good thing from a certain point of view. After all, as long as she kept following him, he could be sure that she didn't approach Mr. Smith's family. Looking at Mr. Poulin, who just went out like this, Nero leaned against the door of the shabby house and began to rub the bangs in front of her forehead again, saying to herself, It's so strange. Yamato had once cut off half of Teacher Poulin's body and swallowed it whole. However, Teacher Poulin had already recovered by then. It was as if the half that was cut off had never been lost. But this wasn't what made Nero feel the strangest. After all, she had no way to completely understand the power of the soul. She wasn't the boss, and there was also that unscrupulous servant girl. Perhaps it was enough to consider Teacher Poulin's situation as one of his special abilities. So, what made her feel the most strange was the relationship between Husky and Old Ha. Old Ha recognized her, but judging from Husky's previous reaction, she didn't know her at all. Nero also carefully analyzed Old Ha's words, and they were indeed not lies. Seeing through lies seemed to be the inherent ability of the Black Soul Messenger, which allowed her to easily distinguish the other party's words. No matter how well the other party controlled their emotions, no matter how good the other party's acting skills were. Since Old Ha and Husky didn't lie, what went wrong? Nero stretched hard and shrugged her neck. What went wrong that made you all taste the same? It's really interesting. So, what Nero really felt strange was that Yamato had swallowed Mr. Poulin's soul. Yamato also directly cut open Joe's body and took out Joe's soul. Yamato also directly penetrated Old Ha's body and touched his soul. The smell of Old Ha, Husky, and Joe's souls were actually the same. In short, the same soul, three different individuals. Old Ha and Husky had similar abilities, like the ability of Hades. As for Joe, he was just a 5-year-old kid who didn't know anything. If there was anything special about Joe, it was probably that he could sense the arrival of the Grim Reaper. At most, his perception was more sensitive. Half a year ago? Nero suddenly remembered Joe's words about the family bucket. She seemed to have an idea. She bit her lips and then made a vomiting gesture. A black and gray lump was directly spat out from her mouth. The ball that she spat out had a small tail, a pair of small hands, and her own face. At least it looked very young. Simply put, it was like a ghost. Nero patted the head of the lump with satisfaction, and then pointed in the direction where Mr. Poulin left. The lump immediately chased after him. Then, she planned to go to the local police station, but before going to the police station, Nero planned to buy breakfast in the town. Black Soul envoys actually didn't need food, but she still kept this habit. Just like how Taisetsu would be happy to do housework, and like how the boss would work and rest according to a normal person's schedule, they all kept some of their old habits. Of course, the reason why she didn't choose to return to the manor for breakfast was because she would definitely be the last to return. I don't want to wash the dishes. Blah 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 blah. Chapter 1450. In the archive room of the police station, it was as if a typhoon had passed through. Nero was sitting cross-legged in the archive room with her body tilted. On the ground, there were overturned information cabinet. The police officer in charge of the archive room had already fallen asleep on the table. It was obviously working time. Oh, it seems to be this one. Nero apparently found something and stopped suddenly. She quickly flipped through the information in her hand. This was a report about the car accident seen half a year ago. According to the report, the car accidentally fell into a cliff, and a family of 4 was sent to the hospital with serious injuries. However, surprisingly, the family of 4 miraculously survived in the hospital. Fell from a cliff, excessive blood loss. Nero carefully read the information from half a year ago. Miraculously survived. She couldn't help but think of the feeling when she broke Joe's body and removed his soul. This made her feel even more surprised. She licked her lips, then took the information directly and left the archive room of the police station. Of course, with her temperament, she would never clean up the messy archive room before leaving, let alone wake up the police officers. Nero felt that she was very well behaved for not making all the police officers fall asleep. It could be said that she was a super good kid, okay? So when she passed by the guard room of the police station, in order to reward herself, Nero smashed a door and opened it. There were several men who were arrested last night because of drunkenness. Oh, she wouldn't care what would happen after that. After taking the information from the police station, she planned to go to the scene of the car accident. Nero gave herself a pair of black eyes, then pointed to the front, cleared her throat and said, "There is only one truth. I can also have a good time playing with myself." Nero slowly floated into the air. During breakfast, Boss Luo didn't seem to care about Nero's disappearance. Even Miss Maid acted as if it didn't happen, and didn't even ask. Of course, when Miss Maid made breakfast, she obviously didn't leave any extra. Taisetsu didn't dare to ask too much. He more or less knew the boss's temperament, and naturally also knew the servant girl's temperament. Most of the women in the world had the same temperament. When a woman didn't take the initiative to talk about something, don't take the initiative to mention it. In Taisetsu's view, Miss Maid was getting more and more lively. Taisetsu couldn't help admiring his boss. He didn't know what means he used to achieve this. Of course, regarding this issue, Daz still had a sense of propriety. He would not run to ask just because the two sides had known each other for a while. This was not a question he could ask. He would just look at it and think about it. "Hasn't Luoya woken up yet?" Boss Luo asked suddenly. Not yet. Miss Maid was brewing a pot of flower tea at this time. She looked at the time and said, But it should be soon. Do you need me to go and take a look? Boss Luo shook his head and said, No need. How about this, if Luo gets up, let Taisetsu accompany her today. If she wants to go out, I'll have to trouble you, Taisetsu. Got it, boss. Taisetsu nodded lightly and said directly, I will protect Miss Luo's safety. Don't say it so seriously. Luochio smiled and said, The premise is that Luo is willing to go out? Besides, even if there is danger, Luo can still fight back. On the one hand, it was because of a soft as a star creature. On the other hand, it was because of Luo's terrifying strength. Did he really think that the castle model made by Miss Maid was so easy to move? In fact, each part of the castle model was the same weight as the real castle material. The model parts just came with some special settings so that they would not smash the floor and table when they fell, but when they were actually picked up, they were extremely heavy. But even so, Luo simply picked them up, as if these model parts were the simplest wooden blocks. It was clear how amazing Luo's strange strength was. Then, I'll find a way to make Miss Luo happy. Taisetsu hesitated for a moment and then said a rather weak suggestion. In fact, Luo could only get close to the boss at the beginning, and now she only slightly accepted Miss Maid by her side. She basically ignored him and Nero. Don't force yourself too much. Luochio thought for a while, then asked Yu to get a note and wrote something on it. When she wakes up, let her see. I hope it can help you. Besides, she still needs to face the outside world by herself. Taisetsu silently took the note written by the boss. In fact, he had always been a little confused about how the boss planned to deal with Miss Loya. Daz was very clear about what Miss Loya's predecessor was, but he didn't know what caused the original Gaia to change into the identity of the boss's sister. This identity, purely in terms of the master-subordinate relationship, was even higher than the servant girl who was the chief steward of the Black Soul Envoy. No matter how powerful Miss Maid was, she still wasn't out of the category of a servant. But the boss's sister was already in the ranks of the master, even though the boss recognized this sister and they weren't even related by blood. At this moment, just as Taisetsu was carefully analyzing the intricate relationship, Boss Luo and Miss Maid had already put on their new clothes and were ready to go out. Today was the first day of classes for Boss Luo and Miss Maid. Take care, boss. Taisetsu walked them all the way to the door. He even planned to drive them to school, but was directly rejected by Miss Maid. Miss Maid said that she hadn't driven a car for a while. As for the car, this car was originally placed in the garage of the manor. Taisetsu and Nero had already discovered it when they were responsible for cleaning the manor. And Taisetsu had already fallen in love with this car when he first saw it. Before he became a Black Soul Envoy, and even before he was imprisoned for 10 years, he was a car maintenance worker, a person who was interested in cars. It took him a lot of effort to repair this expensive beetle. Miss Maid, please step on the accelerator gently. Looking at the beetle that roared out like an arrow, Taisetsu cautiously reminded her. Of course, he didn't intend to let Miss Maid hear this reminder. He just wanted to make himself more at ease. There should be no problem, right? Taisetsu, who always felt a pain in his heart, sighed slowly and then returned to the manor. Miss Loya should not wake up yet, so before that, he should water her. He looked up at the weather. It was another sunny day. Sunny weather naturally made people feel happy. But at this time, his eyes stopped somewhere in the manor, the attic of the manor. That was Miss Loya's room. He saw a small figure standing by the window of the attic at this time, and the curtains were slightly opened. When she felt Taisetsu's gaze, she instantly pulled the curtains up. Taisetsu frowned doubtfully. Has she woken up? The gaze just now. Taisetsu couldn't help but recall the moment when he and Miss Loya's eyes met a few seconds ago. Taisetsu even realized that he actually shuddered a few seconds ago, because of Miss Loya's gaze. She seemed to have lost her humanity again, and became the person who used to be in the Penglai treasure house. He was a little confused about why Miss Loya didn't tell the boss after waking up. Logically speaking, the boss should know whether Miss Loya woke up or not. After hesitating for a moment, Taisetsu decided to put aside his work as a gardener today and directly visit Miss Loya. Taisetsu quickly came to the door of the attic and gently knocked on the door. Soon after, the door was opened, but it was not Miss Loya who opened the door, but her exclusive companion, Mian. Even Taisetsu hadn't seen the magic of this star creation creature once and was amazed. Mian rubbed her eyes with her hand at this time, yawning and saying, "What's the matter, Mr. Taisetsu?" This bolster was quite polite, at least much better than a certain parasite-like guy who didn't come back all night. "Is Miss Loya awake?" Taisetsu thought for a while and asked, "Today, the boss told me to accompany Miss Loya. Well, I want to see if Miss Loya has anything to tell me." "No." Mian shook her head. "Little master hasn't woken up yet. She is still sleeping." "Mr. Taisetsu, are you mistaken?" Taisetsu was stunned. In fact, Mian wasn't too wary of Taisetsu at this time. After all, she also knew the identity of Taisetsu and knew that the Black Soul Messenger was an employee who couldn't go against the will of the owner, Luochio. So she didn't need to be wary at all. Therefore, the door of the room was opened very quickly. Taisetsu could easily see most of the room. He even saw Miss Loya, who was sleeping soundly on a huge mattress. Didn't wake up? If she really didn't wake up, then who did I see just now? Did I make a mistake? Taisetsu was a little puzzled, then nodded and didn't show anything wrong. "Well, please let me know if Miss Loya has any instructions after she wakes up." "Sorry to trouble you, Mr. Taisetsu." Mian is very grateful. The small bolster struggled to make a bending motion at this time. It was indeed quite difficult for a bolster to fold in half. This was really much better than a certain parasite-like guy who didn't come back all night. Really, Taisetsu thought silently in his heart. He quickly left the attic and continued what he had planned to do. Mian didn't mind too much and returned to Luoya's side in a daze. She then stretched her body into a long pillow and burrowed into Luoya's arms. At this time, Loya simply turned her body and looked like she was sleeping soundly. "Brother," she would occasionally make such a soft sound in her sleep. Did I really see it wrongly? As he went down the stairs, Taisetsu was still thinking about this question. He was actually more inclined to believe that he didn't see it wrongly, but unless Mian deceived him. But he really couldn't think of any reason why Mian would deceive him. As he thought about it, a figure floated in front of Taisetsu. Daz stopped. The guy floating in front of him. To be precise, it was an object. It was a machine with a rather advanced shape. Adam. He didn't know where Miss Yu Yi got the technology to create a robot with artificial intelligence. "Hello, Mr. Taisetsu. Is there anything I can do for you?" Speaking of Adam, he had only appeared last night. This was because they had moved the Master God project engine room to the manor after they had settled down in the club's lobby to receive guests. Taisetsu remembered that in addition to Adam, there was another Black Soul envoy who was in charge of the Master God project. He even played a role similar to a manager in the world of the Master God project, Taiyinzi. "I don't have anything that I need your help with. Adam, go ahead and do your thing." Daz looked at the artificial intelligence very politely and said, "Okay." Adam nodded, then turned around and slowly walked into the room. One of the rooms here had been converted into a computer room, after Miss Maid rewrote an expansion pack in the Inhuman domain. The number of servers needed in the Master God project world naturally increased, and the computer room was enlarged. Taisetsu looked inside curiously. He was actually very interested in this kind of online game. After all, before he went to prison, online games had just become popular in China. "Mr. Taisetsu, are you interested in the game?" Adam turned around and asked. Do you need me to set up an account for you to experience it? Is there such an operation? Taisetsu couldn't help but look at the artificial intelligence curiously. Adam nodded and said, "Of course, my master gave me this authority, but also set up that if the Black Soul Envoy intends to enter to experience it, it needs to consume performance points." When Taisetsu heard this, he suddenly had a bad feeling. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. It's really Miss Yu Ye's style. Consuming performance points, isn't this a F***king top-up card? Chapter 1451. Boss, give me a 30 renminbi card. Suddenly, this sentence flashed in Taisetsu's mind. Of course, it was just a flash, evoking some memories from a long time ago. However, for Adam's proposal, Taisetsu was really quite tempted. Adam said that the experience account had 30 days of free experience. After 30 days, he could choose whether to officially start the renewal or stop the use of the experience account. Daz felt that Miss Maid was really like a devil. Not only did she find ways to get the greatest benefits from the guests, but she also found ways to squeeze the GPA points from the Onyx Souls that they didn't need to earn back. As long as there was a transaction, the behavior of consumption probably couldn't be eliminated in this world. He didn't know whether it was because he was too bored, or he needed something new in life, or he was full of curiosity about this mysterious world in the Master God Project. Or it was just because the free experience for the first 30 days was really a waste. Taisetsu nodded in a daze. Experience account successfully created. Character appearance generated. Birth point successfully set. With the sound of Adam's constant tapping on the keyboard, Taisetsu began to feel a strange suction pulling him away from this world. This feeling was very special. It didn't feel like the separation of the soul, but it felt like being pulled away from this world. After a long time, Taisetsu suddenly felt that everything in front of him turned completely white. The white covered everything, and he couldn't even distinguish between north, south, east, and west. This white had faded very quickly, and it was replaced by the blue sky, white clouds, green mountains, and beautiful rivers. The scenery in front of him could no longer be described as simply realistic. This was real. Taisetsu stretched out his hand, opened his fingers, and felt the feeling when the wind flowed through his fingers. He even touched his face, clenched his fist tightly, and even stepped on the ground forcefully. This was a real feeling. He really entered a real world, not the so-called virtual world, let alone the holographic technology that humans were still studying. Taisetsu could only describe what he was feeling at this moment. This was the first time he had entered the world of the Master God plan. At this moment, a white pillar of light suddenly shot down from the sky. The light fell directly in front of Taisetsu. Within the pillar of light, a figure slowly walked out. He wore a checkered shirt, a pair of beach shorts, and a pair of sunglasses. His hair was braided, and he even had a fresh coconut with a straw in his left hand. Taienzi. I am the main god, Taiyin. This place is Even though he was dressed in a checkered shirt, beach pants, and sunglasses, he still had the special effects of holy light. The so-called main god, Taiyin, naturally looked solemn and dignified, probably. But when Taienzi saw that the person who was born here was not a human, but one of his comrades, he was shocked. Wow! There seems to be something over there. Taienzi suddenly pointed forward with a solemn expression at this time. Taisetsu was stunned. He subconsciously looked back. Except for the fairy-like scenery on earth, there was nothing. But when he looked back again, Taienzi, who was dressed in a checkered shirt, beach pants, and sunglasses, had changed into a real solemn and dignified person. He looked like an NPC in a lousy domestic web-based game. It turns out to be Mr. Taisetsu. At this time, Taienzi clasped his hands in front of him. Mr. Taoist, you came from afar. I'm really sorry for not welcoming you. In fact, Taisetsu didn't spend much time in contact with Taienzi. They were staggered for a long time. They only had a few short conversations when they were together. But with this encounter alone, he felt that he could silently put Tainzi and Nero in the same circle. These two fellows were king thick-skinned to a certain level. Probably only his boss would be so tolerant to accept such fellows. Tainzi Dao. Well, in fact, you don't have to be so reserved. Just call me Taisetsu. Taisetsu shook his head. He obviously couldn't learn this kind of genteel way of speaking. I also call you Tainzi directly? That's good. Tainzi stroked his beard and smiled like a very kind elder. Then I'll be arrogant and call you Brother Taisetsu. Why did you come in this time? Is it Master or Miss Yuye's order? In fact, Brother Taisetsu doesn't have to come in personally. You just need to inform me with an emergency command outside. I will naturally appear as soon as possible. You don't have to be nervous. I just came in this time because I was bored. It's not that the boss and Miss Yuyi have something to ask you. Taisetsu waved his hand and said, I originally planned to come here to experience this game. Tainzi turned his eyes suspiciously, then nodded and said, I see. Brother Taisetsu came here to experience it. In that case, how about I be your guide? How can I do that? After all, you have your own job. Taisetsu smiled and said, It should be very tiring to manage such a big place, right? It's not tiring at all. You guys don't come, so it's definitely not tiring. It's best that you don't think of me. How dare I say it's tiring? Tainzi said seriously, This is Master's property. As the first Black Soul envoy personally transformed by Master, I'm indebted to Master for giving me the Master God plan. Tainzi is really grateful to Master for trusting me so much. I can't repay you except… Ahem. Brother Tainzi, what's so fun here? Taisetsu directly interrupted and then asked curiously, I mean, what is the reason for the Master God project to attract so many people to give up everything to come here? Tainzi smiled and said, You don't understand? Come. Brother Taisetsu, wait for me to take care of you today. I'll let you know why this place can attract so many people to come here, and why they are never willing to leave and return to the original dry and desperate world. Taisetsu originally came here to visit, and also had some plans to learn, so he naturally wouldn't object to Tainzi's words and said a few words of flattery. Before becoming a Black Soul envoy, Taisetsu was a real member of society, and even had 10 years in prison, so he dealt with things smoothly. It could be said that among the many Black Soul envoys that had appeared in front of Luochio, Taisetsu was the most down-to-earth and had the most normal character. The others more or less had some character flaws. Well, Brother Taisetsu, you should be using the experience account specially for Black Soul envoys, right? Tainzi thought at this time and said, So you were born directly from me. What's the difference? Taisetsu asked curiously. Tainzi said, In fact, there was no such thing in the past. In the past, all the humans who came here from the modern world would be born directly to me. But recently there was a transit place, so the number of humans who would be born directly to me began to decrease. Transit place? Tainzi suddenly became a little sarcastic and said, It's just two immature brats who don't know anything. They think that they are so great just because they were personally transformed by the Master. They don't know how to respect the seniors at all. Brother Daz, let me tell you. If you meet these two brats in the future, you can't give them a good face in front of them. Young people nowadays can really turn into rainbows with just a little bit of color. They say that my reincarnation system here is too low, and the efficiency is too low. They also said that I randomly gave the reincarnated humans talents, causing the world to be full of Borg. By the way, Brother Taisetsu, what does Borg mean? I'm not very sure. Taisetsu shook his head. It seemed that the two new Black Soul envoys that the boss had safely placed in other subworlds were doing something. However, Tainzi obviously didn't intend to stop complaining. You see, because of these two brats, less than 1/10 of the reincarnated humans were reincarnated by me as the main god. Now, many strange churches have appeared in the next session. As the main god, I'm almost regarded as an evil god by those new gods. By the way, I also heard that they are preparing to crusade against me this time. When I went to reason with those two brats, they told me that it was a new expansion. I'm a new sister. How come I don't know anything? Isn't this a joke? Forget it, I won't say it. I've embarrassed myself in front of you, Brother Taisetsu. This is just a small matter. With my position in the boss's heart, how can I be defeated by these two brats so easily? When I have time to meet the boss, I'll casually talk to him and I'll definitely take back this sovereignty. Ha ha, ha. Taisetsu kept accompanying him and laughed brightly. Did this old brat really not leave this place for too long and live too comfortably here? Not long after, Taiyinzi took Sui Xiong to a huge palace. Taisetsu dared to say that this huge palace was even more magnificent than the palace of the Penglai Immortal that he had seen in the Penglai treasure vault. According to Taiyinzi, this was only one of his palaces, which was used for summer relaxation. Extremely extravagant. This was Taisetsu's reaction after seeing this palace. Thinking about it this way, Zhao Lu and Chen Mingming's various criticisms of Taiyinzi seemed to be reasonable. What's this? Taiyinzi took Taisetsu to a mirror and let Taisetsu stand in front of it. Brother Taisetsu, this is the magic mirror that I made with my authority, Taiyinzi said very proudly at this time. I originally used it to reward those guys who were reincarnated from my place. As long as they could complete some special tasks that I issued, they could use this magic mirror. But Brother Taisetsu, you and I are brothers. Since you came to my place, of course, you can use it as you wish. Taiyinzi laughed. You just need to put your hand in front of this mirror and think of the person you want in your heart, then the person you want will come out of the magic mirror. In short, you can use this magic mirror to create a person who is completely controlled by your thoughts. Of course, it can also be a living creature. In short, the thing that is created will completely act according to your thoughts. Taisetsu was startled. He subconsciously put his hand in front of the mirror and a face that was hidden in the depths of his memory suddenly flashed in his mind. It was his daughter. At this time, the surface of the magic mirror fluctuated. Not long after, the surface of the mirror began to protrude, and then a small figure peeled off the surface of the mirror, walked out. It began to have a physical body, and then turned into a little girl with a twisted braid. The little girl had big watery eyes. She raised her head and the moment she saw Taisetsu, she revealed a sweet smile. Daddy? I missed you so much. You finally came to see me. Taisetsu's body trembled slightly. The little girl reluctantly hugged him. Taisetsu lowered his head and looked at the young face. He could not help but feel helpless. Until he became a Black Soul envoy, he had never had such an experience. This was the moment that he had yearned for day and night, and it came true so easily in this place. He knew that this was only the ability of the magic mirror that Taiyinzi made. This was all fake. But how many people could resist this kind of reality? It's really hard to refuse. Taisetsu took a deep breath and looked down at the little girl in his arms, faintly saying, I can probably understand why people who enter here are not willing to leave. Who can resist? Right. Taiyinzi's face was full of complacency. Unexpectedly, Taisetsu shook his head at this time and gently pushed the little girl in his arms away. But a fake is a fake after all. Brother Taiyinzi, thank you very much for this magic mirror. But I can't accept it. Why? Taiyinzi was stunned. Brother Taisetsu, you can enjoy it as much as you want. Anyway, this is also an experience account, isn't it? Taisetsu still shook his head and gave a perfunctory reason. I have to take care of the manor today. Boss and Miss Yu have just gone to school. Before they come back, I need to finish this work. Master and Taiyinzi blinked and suddenly said, Brother Taisetsu, how about this? Why don't you leave the manor to me temporarily? You can have a good experience here. Leave it to you? Taisetsu frowned. Teinzi immediately said seriously, Yes, it's just cleaning the manor. Do you think this poor priest can't do such a small thing? Besides, there will be times when it's boring to stay here every day. Why don't you let me go outside to take a breath of fresh air, and you can have a good experience here? Well, I mean, you can continue to use this magic mirror. Taisetsu was silent for a moment. The little girl who walked out of the magic mirror looked up at him with a hopeful expression, which made Taisetsu's heart tremble slightly. For some reason, he nodded and said, Then, all right. Chapter 1452. Well then, Brother Taisetsu, you can stay here and enjoy the experience. Don't worry about me, I'll be fine. So don't worry. I'll help you with your work too, Sky. I don't feel at ease. Taisetsu silently watched Teinzi open the portal and leave with a bright smile. He opened his mouth but couldn't say no in the end. The little girl created by the magic mirror was holding his hand. She looked uneasy. Taisetsu sighed softly and reached out to stroke the little girl's head. There were many times when he could only hide in a corner and watch quietly. At that time, he felt that as long as he could see such a smiling face, it was already the most satisfying thing. He didn't even expect that there would be a time like this. The magic mirror is really the right name, Taisetsu thought to himself as he walked in front of the magic mirror again. Since his daughter had appeared through the magic mirror, then, he placed his hand on the magic mirror again and began to recall the most precious memories that he had kept hidden for a long time. Taisetsu, a woman's voice quietly whispered in his ear. Finally, a pair of soft hands gently stroked his face. At this time, Taisetsu didn't want to think about anything else. He just wanted to stay here and never leave. So high. I feel like I've reached the end of my life. The moment he returned to the modern world from the Master God Project world, Teinzi swayed his butt coquettishly and sang a little tune. He didn't hate the world of the Master God Project, but he had eaten too many delicacies and occasionally wanted to taste simple tea and simple food. In fact, it was mainly because after most of the connections with the modern world were cut off and the connection was changed to another subworld, the conditions for him to communicate with the modern world through the network were getting worse and worse. Sometimes there was even no signal. There was no signal. Teinzi couldn't help but think of a problem. If you were given an annual salary of $1 million, but you had to live on an isolated island for 5 years, it wouldn't be a big deal if you didn't have any friends or a girlfriend, but you wouldn't have the internet. There was no internet. There was no internet. Pop songs. Hippies. Drama. Mr. Teinzi, are you planning to leave your post? This is not called leaving, this is called resting. I have time to rest, Adam. Teinzi knocked hard on Adam's head. In the past, Teinzi would never dare to knock Adam like this. This was made by Miss Maid, her son. But after all, he and Adam had been working together for such a long time and were familiar with each other. The main reason was that Adam wouldn't report such a knock. In Adam's thinking circuit, there seemed to be no judgment of being knocked. Of course, Adam had the judgment of defending himself when he was attacked, but the point was that the defense after being attacked was against an unfamiliar target. Black Soul Envoy was obviously not a threat, so the knock of the Black Soul Envoy naturally couldn't be judged as a malicious attack. Teinzi's knock made Adam's head shake a few times, like a gong on a drum stand. Okay, Mr. Teinzi, now start recording your rest time. According to the Master's rules, you can get 1 minute of rest time for every 1,000 hours you work in the world of Master God Project. You currently have 5 minutes of rest time. Oh my god. This F** King Blackhearted made. Oh okay, Adam, I got it. Teinzi nodded expressionlessly. He wouldn't argue with Adam, because Adam was just following orders. Only an idiot would argue with a pile of code. In fact, the most important thing was that, if there was any doubt about Adam's operation, it would immediately report it to Miss Maid. Oh, by the way, Adam, is your energy about to be replenished? Taiyinzi turned his eyes and suddenly asked. I still have 47% of my energy, and it won't affect my work at all, Mr. Taiyinzi. Taiyinzi shook his head and said, This won't do, Adam. As a service-type program, you don't even have half of your battery left. I have reason to believe that you, who are not in your best condition, will not be able to cope with all the special situations. So, I request that you fully replenish your battery. Adam's electronic eyes were constantly flashing, as if it was thinking about whether there was any conflict between Taiyinzi's request and its program. Finally, Adam's program determined that less than 50% of its energy would indeed cause some of its special functions to be unable to be fully used. Okay, I understand, Mr. Taiyinzi. I'll start the charging now. Adam straightened up. This time the charging will stop after reaching 70%. The charging time will be 1 hour and 27 minutes. Adam said slowly, The external server of Project God will be hosting the program. The hosting time will be 1 hour and 30 minutes. Mr. Taiyinzi, please return to your post after 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Don't worry. When you've finished charging, you'll see me in the world of Project God, Taiyinzi said with a serious face. After Adam entered the hosting mode, he quickly went to the dedicated charging location. It needed to enter a dormant state to charge. Mr. Taiyinzi, you still have 2 minutes and 45 seconds to rest, please make good use of it. Taiyinzi waved at Adam. Don't worry, I'll be back soon, don't worry. We've worked together for so long, you should know that I'm very punctual. Adam's electronic eyes finally dimmed completely, and the gentle smile on Taiyinzi's face gradually disappeared, replaced by a sneer. He rested his head on his hands, whistling as he walked to Adam. He continued to whistle, then turned around and his palm accidentally swept across the charging interface. In fact, he really didn't do anything bad. He just extended Adam's charging time by 4 times. Charging too fast would hurt the battery. This was for its own good. Adam would wake up after 6 hours. Note that the hosting time of the external server was only 1 hour and 30 minutes. Of course, there was no problem. Even if there was a problem, there was still Zhao Lu and Chen Mingming, these 2 brats, to deal with it. Since these 2 brats were so capable, they would definitely be able to deal with it well. If they couldn't deal with it well, it must be because they weren't capable enough. 2 newbies, you should work hard. 6 hours. I can do a lot of things. China, Shanghai, Binjiang District. As a new development zone, there were many companies in the emerging industry gathered here. Of course, there were many companies in the internet industry. Among the many industrial parks, there was a building that rarely had people coming in and out since a few months ago. Not long ago, there were still a lot of people in the game industry in this building. The building was completely closed at this time, even the windows were not opened. However, there were people working in this building all the time, a large number of people from the logistics department of the Kelowna administration. Of course, in addition to the logistics department, there were also many agents from the administration. There were even 3 senior agents guarding here. The reason why the administrative bureau was so serious was that this game called Jade Fantasy had swallowed up too many citizens so far. Now, the souls of the people who were sucked into the game world were secretly sent to a medical facility in a military-restricted area. So far, a lot of manpower and material resources had been invested, but they still couldn't wake them up. Modern medical technology couldn't treat the symptoms of these patients. The doctors could only try their best to maintain the life index of these people who had lost their souls. However, once the people in the game died in the game, no matter how healthy the body index of the people in the outside world was, they would still die directly. 3,990. This was the death toll so far. Such a huge death toll was definitely a disaster no matter which country it was in. If the country didn't have an extremely powerful mechanism operating crazily, it wouldn't have been able to suppress it. However, if this situation couldn't be improved, there would be a day when it would be discovered. Fortunately, recently, the number of times the patients were discovered had decreased drastically. After a long period of research, the authority finally came to a conclusion. This soul-devouring game might have reached a certain level of saturation, which was why the number of soul-devouring cases had decreased recently. They had to study the nature of this game before it started swallowing souls on a large scale again. For this reason, the Kelowna administration had been operating crazily. They even stopped a lot of established activities in order to transfer more personnel. But so far, after many efforts, the administration had only succeeded in allowing the soul of a logistics staff to enter the game world. Although this logistics staff could communicate with the administration through the chat channel in the game world, the administration had no choice but to find that the way this logistics staff entered the game couldn't be replicated. First, they had to receive a yes/no email. In the end, except for this logistics staff, no one else had received such an email. This had evolved into a very awkward situation. A large number of people in the administration had to protect this logistics staff at all times in order to ensure that this logistics staff wouldn't die in the game world due to danger and lose the only connection with the game world. They had to protect this logistics staff at all times to ensure his safety in the game. He would be online to protect her 24/7, ensuring that at least 30 game characters would stay by her side. She would change shifts every 6 hours, completely eliminating all dangerous situations. If this logistics staff had to participate in dangerous activities, missions in the game, they would increase the number of people protecting him. Simply put, hundreds of logistics staff in the building and many agents in the administration had become the lucky one who accidentally entered the game world to play with him. How ironic! As one of the 3 senior agents in the building, Jean Taiping rubbed his eyebrows tiredly. He had just finished his protection work and went offline on the spot. As a senior agent in the administration, he had to stay in this place every day and play computer games in front of the screen every day. It would be a joke if others knew about it. Ironically, as an agent of the administration, they couldn't reveal anything to their families. Jean Taiping had told his wife and children that he worked in the game company and that his daily work was related to the game. At that time, he was just trying to cover it up. He didn't expect that it would really become a job where he did nothing but play games. "Thank you for your hard work, team leader." A replacement agent walked over at this time, then sat in Jean Taiping's Year of the Snake. He turned on the computer, took a few glances and said in surprise, "Hey, this guy is now in the top 5 of the ranking. After all, we are here to protect him all day long." Jean Taiping shook his head and said, "Even a pig can be forced up there, right?" "That's true." The team member smiled bitterly, then shook his head. "Leader, you said that hundreds of us accompanied him, but he only made it to the top 5. Then what kind of monsters are the other 4 in the top 5? Could it be that they have a huge team behind them? Especially the first and second. They are actually husband and wife. They have completed a total of 7 legendary missions and 3 unique hidden missions. How can they survive?" Jean Taiping said, "I was also curious about the first and second couple, so I studied them for a while. I found that most of the time they were in a normal team. Most of the missions were carried out by the couple. Occasionally, they would team up with some scattered players. There shouldn't be a team behind them. That's strange. It's 9 years of compulsory education. Why are they so outstanding? Don't talk nonsense." Jean Taiping knocked on his team member's head and lit up a cigarette. This first and second ranked couple seems to be the earliest batch to enter this game world. They seem to have obtained many out-of-print items in the early days, and these items have disappeared in the later updates. It is because of these out-of-print items that they were able to surpass the other players by so much. They are also in the top 5, but according to my estimation, including us, the 4th and 3rd, I'm afraid that even if we join forces, we won't be a match for the couple. Of course, if it's a team battle, naturally, it will be a different situation, right? At this time, he suddenly remembered the broadcast. Attention! Attention! The server is shaking. With the broadcast, on the computer of the team member next to Jean typing, a yes/no message suddenly appeared. Chapter 1453. This was a special team formed from people from all over the world to deal with the game that devoured people's souls. Although there were so many people that it could not be described as a team. These people from the administration had been working hard in the building for several months, but they had not made any progress. Come unexpectedly, that strange email appeared again today. As one of the 3 team leaders, Jean Taiping thought that he had made sufficient preparations to deal with the special situation at any time. However, when the email appeared, Jean Taiping found that he did not know what to do. All the discussions, hypotheses, and analyses that had been going on could not be used at this moment. He could only stare blankly at the computer of the team member beside him. He looked at the prompt box that suddenly popped up on the screen with clear words, until another email appeared from another computer, and the broadcast sounded in the building again. Jean Taiping woke up from his temporary absent-mindedness. Team leader, there is a countdown prompt here. What should we do? The team member next to Jean Taiping asked hurriedly. The countdown time was not long, only 1 minute. Obviously, there was not much time left for thinking. If they were not careful, they might miss it. They had been working hard for this matter for several months, and had spent a lot of manpower and material resources. Obviously, they did not want to miss this opportunity that they had been waiting for. After all, no one knew when the next mail would appear if they missed this opportunity. Perhaps they would never be able to wait for it again. That was also an unknown. We have been waiting for this moment all along. Jean Taiping directly put out the cigarette at this time, gritting his teeth and saying, "We have made so many preparations for this, but unfortunately, it is not me. I will give you 20 seconds. If you have anything to say, say it to me." The team member was silent for a few seconds, then took a deep breath and said, "Team leader, please tell my girlfriend that I love her. Her name is Ajun." Jean Taiping nodded silently, patting the young agent's shoulder. He remembered the young man's nickname and said seriously, "Don't worry, I will pass your words to her, Frog." "Many thanks, team member." Froggy slowly sighed, then moved the mouse to the confirm button on the prompt box. His finger quickly clicked. "I will definitely complete the mission. Don't worry, team leader." Nothing happened in front of his eyes. There was no strange movement, but this young investigator, after clicking confirm, strangely fell down, his face rolling on the keyboard. Jean Taiping couldn't help but slam his fist on the table as he watched the lively young man fall in front of him, and he couldn't do anything about it. At this time, the sound of falling machines continuously came from the nearby machines. Jean Taiping raised his head and looked at the number 2 room with hundreds of machines. His scalp suddenly became numb. He had waited bitterly for several months to no avail, but he did not expect that there would be an explosion of so many emails today. "Come, let me see who you are, whether you are a demon or a ghost. I will definitely personally." Jean Taiping swore to himself. Before he could finish his oath, an eye-catching prompt box appeared on the machine where he was. Yes/no. Jean Taiping's pain suddenly contracted. His palm almost didn't hesitate and instantly covered the mouse. This was even his instinctive reaction. The mouse had already moved to the confirm button. Jean Taiping took a deep breath and his finger was about to press the button at this time. But at this moment, he found that his finger seemed to be stiff. It was as if he couldn't exert any strength. The mouse button that was originally incomparably sensitive now seemed to be stuck. Jean Taiping's forehead was already covered in a fine layer of cold sweat. Suddenly, a series of rapid footsteps approached him. Team leader Jean. What's the situation over here? Over there. He saw a man in his 30s with a square face, who gave off a serious feeling, walking towards him. His eyebrows were filled with anxiety. Seeing the man approaching quickly, Jean Taiping's heart suddenly beat very fast. He clenched his teeth, moved the mouse slightly, and pressed the deny button with his finger. The prompt box disappeared in an instant. When the man who was walking quickly finally arrived in front of Jean Taiping, he saw the scene. You saw the situation, we didn't have time to react at all. Jean Taiping shook his head. Froggy was right next to me, but I couldn't do anything. I really want to be the one in the game. He's still so young. Jean Taiping didn't blush as he imagined, nor did his heart beat fast as he imagined. He found himself so calm at this moment. So calm that even he himself felt scared. Don't be too sad. The man gently patted Jean Taiping's shoulder. I also watched my own team member being sucked in and couldn't do anything. I can understand your feelings. But now is not the time to be depressed. What we need to do now is to ensure the safety of the team members who entered the game. You're right. Jean Taiping nodded. Count the number of people who entered as soon as possible. In addition, I'm afraid we need to ask the higher-ups for more manpower. We used so many people just to protect one person before, I'm afraid it won't be so easy this time. Indeed. The final count was 31 people, including the logistics staff, who accidentally entered the game world at the beginning. Now there were 32 members of the Kelowna administration who were trapped in the game world. How is it? Have you installed it? In the pet hospital, the true dragon of China was standing behind the little butterfly monster with a bag of chips in his arms. He watched the little butterfly monster fiercely fiddle with the installation of the game client. I don't know why it's always stuck at 99%. Luo Dance looked at him innocently. It shouldn't be. Didn't those bastards of the administration say it's an internal account and can be logged in directly? Shinryu of Kelowna frowned. Are those bastards playing with me? Butterfly Monster hurriedly said, No. This account is real, because the client couldn't be downloaded before. Maybe there's something wrong with the server. Oh, it's done. Let me see. Shinryu of Kelowna picked up a bottle of yogurt and opened the lid. He didn't have time to lick the yogurt on the lid and directly came forward, staring at the screen in front of him. The client of the game appeared so clearly on the screen. Jade Fantasy Evil Dragon Era 1. 4.0.1.1.1. A ferocious black divine dragon that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws was running through the entire client interface. It made the client look very cool, but it also gave people a faint sense of oppression. But Kelowna of Shinryu didn't know why he frowned as he looked at it. Long Shirua didn't say why, but simply felt very uncomfortable, until Butterfly Monster tilted her head and said, Sister Long, this black dragon on the interface is very similar to you. Heh! Kelowna's Shinryu was smiling. He gently pinched the table with his fingers. With a crack, he tore a corner of the table. This damned woman, is there no end to this? Long Shirua suddenly understood where the unpleasant feeling in her heart came from. As Sister Long? What are you waiting for? Create an account. Kelowna's Shinryu laughed coldly. If I don't destroy the levels of this game, I won't be a Shinryu anymore. Sister Long, what character are you going to play? Luo Dance asked tentatively. The one with the highest attack will do, Long Shirua said without thinking. Hence, Kelowna's Shinryu played a fire mage. Creation, successful naming, successful. Character name, your man doesn't want you anymore. Go. Let's kill the final boss directly. Kelowna's Shinryu sat in front of the computer, controlling the fire mage. Your man doesn't want you anymore. Butterfly Monster started to go berserk. For the sake of safety, she created a healer character that could assist. Sister Long, we can't do that. We can't leave the newbie village yet. We have to complete the mission. Then hurry up. Kelowna's Shinryu pounded the table, rubbing his fist. Apparently, he couldn't wait any longer. She probably forgot the purpose of studying this game. Butterfly Monster sighed. She always felt that playing games was a waste of time. She didn't know if she would miss the courses she signed up for. She really didn't understand these humans. How could playing games be more enjoyable than studying? Ah, Sister Long, don't rush up. I can't heal you up. But the invincible Shinryu in Kelowna returned to the resurrection point in the newbie village after a flash of white light, in a building that Zhao Lu and Chen Mingming were in charge of. At this moment, Zhao Lu came out of the kitchen with a double cup of coffee that had been brewed. Chen Mingming was sitting in his office chair at this time, and his expression looked somewhat stern. They had been working in this alternate world for more than a month. Although it was called an alternate world, Zhao Lu was used to treating it as an alternate world within an alternate world. Other than not being able to contact his family directly, it wasn't that he couldn't adapt to the environment of this subworld. The only bad thing was that the technology in this subworld was too advanced. Humans rarely left their houses, and the streets were deserted. Everything could be done with the help of the internet. What happened? Zhao Lu asked curiously. Although boss said that he would be in charge of everything here. But in fact, Zhao Lu would discuss things with Chen Mingming. Most of the time, he would follow Chen Mingming's plan. He really felt that Chen Mingming's ability was much higher than his. Chen Mingming did not look up. He just kept staring at the screen. I don't know what's happening in our world. There are so many new accounts coming in all of a sudden. Logically speaking, the channel in that world should be controlled. Could it be that something happened in the other world? Zhao Lu frowned. Should we report this to boss? Chen Mingming thought for a while and said, that's not necessary. Although the number of new accounts increased suddenly, it's still within control. How about this, let's classify these new accounts first. If we have to trouble boss for everything, we probably won't have a future in our careers. Besides, I feel that this matter is a bit strange. Strange? Maybe it's some kind of test. Chen Mingming thought for a while and said, after all, our current work doesn't seem that complicated. It doesn't have much effect on improving our ability. Zhao Lu said, boss doesn't seem like the type to test suddenly? Who knows? Chen Mingming glanced at Zhao Lu casually. Zhao Lu didn't know, but he had experienced it himself. He was suddenly invited and was suddenly tested. However, since Mingming said there's no problem, then there shouldn't be a problem. Zhao Lu was very optimistic. Then I'll help. Chen Mingming nodded. Let me handle the classification of these new souls. You watch the entrance of this subworld. Okay. Zhao Lu smiled, then looked at Chen Mingming and said, Mingming, you are really reliable. Chen Mingming glanced at Zhao Lu expressionlessly, then picked up the coffee and took a sip. The 1500 green beetle drove slowly on the path. This was a road on campus, so it couldn't drive fast. Obviously, it wasn't a particularly luxurious supercar, but it had a lot of people turning their heads. After all, it was already an antique car. It was rare that it was so well maintained. Even students who knew about cars would be fascinated by the engine sound of this old Beetle. Of course, its ride experience couldn't be compared with modern cars. After all, the technology was always improving. But obviously, Miss Maid was very happy driving today. The last time I drove it was almost 30 years ago. I didn't expect Taisetsu's car repair skills to be so good. Miss Maid gently stepped on the brake and stopped the car. Because of inertia, she and the boss leaned forward slightly. Luoqiu smiled slightly. Miss Maid was indeed more comfortable than Ren Xiling. At least, Miss Maid wouldn't step on the accelerator before turning. Speaking of which class is Teacher Poulin's? After getting off the car, Boss Luo asked curiously. Because Miss Maid also enrolled in the same subject, Boss Luo, who was gradually becoming useless, didn't even pay attention to the class schedule. It's the second class in the morning, master. Miss Maid smiled slightly. After class, we can go and try the canteen here. Speaking of the school canteen, Boss Luo hadn't experienced it for a long time. Since Yu Yi. Then let's go to class, our first class. Luocho held Miss Maid's hand and walked to the teaching building. Chapter 1454. A black whirlwind swept through the courtyard of the manor, and the messy grass instantly became tidy. Before this black whirlwind actually swept all the way from the manor. Taiyinzi. Although it was a little trick, Taiyinzi also knew that if he did not do a good job with Taisetsu, it would not be so easy to come out next time. In fact, there was one thing that Taiyinzi did not tell Taisetsu, and that was the place where he lived in the world of the Master God Project. It was one of the pillars of the entire Master God Project. The existence of the pillars was to stabilize the world of the Master God Project. Taiyinzi's own place was a little special, and that was, it required the presence of the Black Soul Envoys to stabilize the pillars. This was the main reason why he could not leave often. But with Taisetsu, it was different. Taisetsu's existence could directly stabilize the pillars, and this way, he could replace Taiyinzi. Taiyinzi did not know if Taisetsu would realize this in the end, but for the sake of the magic mirror, Taisetsu should tacitly agree to this exchange, right? Besides, didn't he finish all the cleaning work for him? Looking at the tidy courtyard and more than 5 hours of free time, Taiyinzi instantly felt that his life had reached the peak. Well, today's weather is also very good. Taiyinzi set up a beach chair and a parasol in the courtyard of the manor. He made himself a cocktail, put on his sunglasses, and began to sunbathe. At this moment there was a sound. It should be the sound of the window opening. Taiyinzi looked up and saw that in the attic on one side of the manor, in front of the open window, a small figure poked her head out and looked into the distance. The breeze lifted her hair. Luoya. Taiyinzi blinked. He obviously remembered this girl. After all, when he was in the Penglai treasure vault, he was hunted down by this girl. But later, this girl moved into the shop and was recognized as his sister by the owner. Master's little sister is naturally at the master rank as well. The slave soul in Taiyinzi's body, the loyalty in his body immediately began to burn. He turned into a black gust of wind and blew to the window of the pavilion. He had already turned into a sage-like appearance. Respected Miss Loya, this humble Taoist greets you. Loya felt that the scenery in front of her was suddenly blocked, and she blinked subconsciously. She tilted her head, and Taiyinzi, who was in her line of sight, was moved out of the line of sight. This humble Taoist is Taiyinzi. Taiyinzi didn't care about this at all. Girls, especially girls who didn't seem to be in a clear state of mind, it was normal for them to have a strange personality. For little girls, although they couldn't be said to be very powerful, there were always ways to deal with them. After all, when Yu Sanyang shed her fox body and turned into a human being and joined the Huanzhen sect, it was Taiyinzi who raised her hand and foot. On the other hand, as one of the people who experienced the Penglai treasure vault incident, even from a certain room, Taiyinzi could be said to be one of the initiators of the Penglai treasure vault incident. He naturally knew some of Luoya's specific situation. He even found a strange portrait in a room in the huge spaceship back then. The portrait was of his boss and Luoya. It was just that their appearances were slightly different. Taiyinzi naturally didn't dare to inquire about the mystery behind it. He was very satisfied with his current life, and he didn't want to be in the limelight at all. It was best that everyone didn't think of him. As long as he could occasionally be lazy and come out to take a breather, he would be satisfied. At this moment, a small figure rushed to the windowsill and stared at Taiyinzi with her hands on her waist. It was Xing Creation Creatures, soft. Little master doesn't like you, hurry up and go away. Facing Soft's malicious words at this time, Taiyinzi wasn't angry. He had basically mastered the skill of observing people's facial expressions. Since this strange creature could call Leia little master, It must be Luoya's personal red man. Moreover, in the shop, there was only one owner in name, and that was the boss of the shop, Luochio. But this creature called Luoya Little Master. Therefore, this creature did look very weird, but in Tai Yinzi's opinion, it was a guy that should not be offended easily. If it was in ancient times 500 years ago, a character like Mian was clearly a maid who was especially capable of doing bad things by a lady's side. A personal servant. Oh, my God! There's actually such a perfect bolster in this world. Forgive me for my inexperience, but I really can't see what kind of exquisite craftsmanship could create such a perfect bolster like you. Miss, how should I address you? Taiyinzi gently bowed at this time. Yes, my Taoist name is Taiyinzi. I'm a Black Soul Envoy under the Master's name, and the first Black Soul Envoy that the Master personally transformed. At this time, Soft stared at Taiyinzi and blinked. Actually, it didn't know much about the shop, because before it was transformed into a creature by Nan Xiaonan, it had always been living in Ren Xiling's house, and most of its memories were about Luochio and Ren Xiling. This is the first Black Soul Envoy that the Master personally transformed? It does look similar to those respected seniors in the TV series. No wonder it was the first to be transformed by the Master. It looks very reliable, and it's quite sensible. It can tell that my craftsmanship is extraordinary at first glance. Ayaya, I suddenly feel a little shy when it's called perfect. Old immortal, you're too polite. My name is Soft. I used to be the Master's bolster. Soft immediately put her hands on her waist and bowed politely to Taiyinzi. I'm sorry. I thought that old immortal was some guy of unknown origin who wanted to harm little Master. Hee, so it's Miss Soft. Taiyinzi put on a fake smile and bowed again. Miss Mian, you're so lucky to be the Master's pillow. I'm so envious of you. You're flattering me. Business people complimented each other, and the servant looked at the servant. This was probably the feeling. Then, Soft and Taiyinzi chatted happily. It didn't take long for them to talk about everything and complain to each other. Yes, I also think that Yu Yi is too much. You stick to the Master every day and don't give Miss Luoya a chance at all. Right. Taiyinzi nodded and said seriously, how can a woman be in charge of the dignified commander of the Black Soul Envoys? Isn't this a matter of a hen taking charge of the morning? Old immortal, don't you think it's a bit too much? Soft couldn't help but tighten her face. Although she had always been with Miss Luoya and even stayed by Miss Luoya's side almost all the time, in the limited contact with Miss Maid, she could still feel the power of this maid. She felt that even if she was just gossiping behind her back, it was still a frightening feeling. Miss Soft, don't panic. Taiyinzi quickly said at this time. Miss Luoya is the Master's sister, so she's naturally our Master. What can that hateful woman do even if she's the commander of the Black Soul Envoys? Could it be that she could disobey her Master? Soft, you're the bolster of the little Master Luoya. Even an old Taoist like me wouldn't dare to blaspheme such a noble status. How can that be? Old immortal, you're really too much. I'm not as good as you say. Miss Soft, don't belittle yourself. What I said today is all from the bottom of my heart. Taiyinzi was solemn at this time, and his face was full of sincerity. Even if that vicious woman is here, I have to say this. Miss Mian, you're so much better than that vicious woman. This little bolster had never been praised like this before. At this time, her head was dizzy, as if she was about to float. She only felt that the old immortal's words were very reasonable and to the point. She felt that she was indeed being belittled. Since she had life, she had been working as a companion, which was really a waste of her talent. Of course, this didn't mean that Miss Soft was dissatisfied with the work of accompanying Miss Luoya. She just felt that she might be able to do more. Old immortal, you too. Soft's face was flushed at this time. Old immortal is so steady, The master should put you in an important position more. Ah. Taiyinzi suddenly frowned, and his face was full of bitterness. Miss Soft. You don't know, but I've been a little distant from the master recently. Old immortal, why is that? Soft immediately asked with concern. Taiyinzi said with a sad expression, It's all because of that vicious woman. She was jealous of my achievements that day, so she used some dirty tricks behind my back, and then used her beauty to seduce the master. This. Soft was shocked. How is this possible? It doesn't look like it? Miss Soft, there's something you don't know. Taiyinzi sighed again at this time. That vicious woman looks so dignified, but her heart is vicious. What did she do? How did she do to this penniless priest? This penniless priest will tell you in detail. Oh. Soft nodded vigorously and sat down obediently. Taiyinzi began to describe vividly, and Soft nodded from time to time, looking surprised from time to time. Then, the servant and maid did not notice that Miss Loya had walked out of the room in the attic. After leaving the room, Loya looked at the empty corridor, tilted her head, and casually chose a direction to walk in. Her gaze kept moving, as if she was looking for something. Brother, she searched through the rooms one by one. With Loya's physical ability, she could easily open the door made of steel, let alone these wooden doors. Finally, Loya opened the door of another room, the door of the Master God Project engine room. The interior of this room looked much more spacious than it looked from the outside. The entire room was filled with all kinds of servers, with crystals as the main structure. Loya saw Adam, who was charging, and walked over. She reached out and gently touched Adam's body. Then, she knocked a few times. Seeing that Adam still did not react, she ignored him. However, she knocked a few times, and one of them clearly hit Adam's head, leaving a small dent. She did not care about this. Then, she curiously sized up the servers in the room. She suddenly came in front of a server. Loya tilted her head and looked at the sockets in the server. Her eyes suddenly flashed, and then they revealed a purple light. In her pupils, circles of colorful light flashed. Suddenly, Loya raised her palm, and a wire-like plug shot out from her palm. It pierced into the interface of the server seamlessly. Loya slowly closed her eyes. After closing her eyes, Loya felt as if she had entered another room. She could feel a lot of information filling this complicated room. Although Loya's power had always been limited because of the altar, she was an artificial creature, and mainly made of myriad element. So she had a very high creation potential. Unknowingly, Loya, who was like a blank sheet of paper, began to crazily absorb the information in this room. At the same time, a consciousness seemed to have found a place to reside or found an exit, and suddenly separated from Loya's consciousness. The separated consciousness was so weak, but in this room, it crazily absorbed a lot of information and gradually grew stronger. Unknowingly, in the modern world of the Internet, a new consciousness gradually solidified. It used everything in the Internet as its own nutrients and finally gradually formed its own shape. It finally took shape and then broke away from Loya's control. In an instant, it used this server as a springboard and disappeared into the ocean of the Internet. Loya suddenly opened her eyes. At this moment, she had a puzzled expression. Then, she blinked and looked at the thread on her palm. She seemed to not like it and immediately broke the thread from her palm. After breaking it, Loya seemed to be sleepy again. She walked back the way she came and returned to her room in the attic. Mian, who was chatting crazily, looked back and found that the little master was still sleeping, so she stopped paying attention. However, not long after, yes/no, emails began to appear in the modern world on a large scale. In just one day, there were more than tens of thousands of strange comas in the modern world. But this was a story for later. Chapter 1455. What is God? It was the second class in the morning in the big classroom, but there weren't many students. This was originally an unpopular subject, so a question appeared on the screen. This was Teacher Pu Lin's lesson. Perhaps the number of students attending today's lesson wasn't small, but it obviously couldn't be compared to when there were fewer people attending some popular subjects. The students sat in different places in twos and threes. The attention they paid to Teacher Pu Lin's question on the screen clearly wasn't as high as the attention they paid to the two new students, or it could be said that from the start of class, these two new students had practically attracted everyone's attention in the classroom. One was a young man with a typical Asian face with Oriental blood, and the other was a beautiful woman with a little bit of Russian blood but was as delicate as a doll. The two new students obviously knew each other. They came in together and sat on the seats next to each other. The university campus was relatively more free, unlike high school, so there wasn't a situation where the tutor introduced the new students before the class started. So the students were more curious about the situation of these two new students. After all, it had been a while since the start of the school, and it was very rare to choose to transfer at this time, not to mention whether they could keep up with the class. Just the fact that they chose the unpopular subject of theology was enough to make people curious. What is God? Even so, the class had already started, so the question given by Professor Pu Lin also needed to be considered. Professor Pu Lin looked very gentle as a lab rat, but his attitude towards learning was very strict. There was once a student who didn't care much about the class because of Professor Pu Lin's gentle appearance, and was mercilessly judged by Professor Pu Lin to be unqualified for the subject. There wasn't even a chance to make an exception. What is God? Professor Pu Lin picked up the microphone at this time and looked at the classroom in front of him. He didn't pay special attention to any student, even if it was the new student he met twice yesterday, Luochio. Maybe you are very curious. Why do I have to ask you this question halfway through the semester? Professor Pu Lin casually leaned on the podium at this time. It's because I suddenly want to do a test today. Do you know what I want to test? After this period of study, our understanding of theology? An active student raised his hand and directly answered. Professor, you recently have a new understanding of the definition of God. Maybe you want to tell us. Oh shit, this rubbish subject should have been abolished long ago. I'll take you to study economics. The more naughty answer came from a male student dressed in hip-hop style. Like an undercurrent, a burst of stifled laughter slowly flowed out in the dreary classroom. The atmosphere seemed to have improved a little. Teacher Pu Lin also revealed a smile at this moment. First of all, if you change departments, you may have to pay your tuition fees again. Then, you'll have to use half of the time compared to others to complete the credits they need to take this semester. There was another burst of low laughter. At this time, Professor Pu Lin gently tapped the microphone at this time, making the classroom quiet. So, new students, can you answer me, what is God? Finally, Teacher Pu Lin's gaze fell on the two new students. Are the young gentlemen coming, or are the ladies first? It seemed that the so-called test was actually intended to test the two new students. The students curiously locked their eyes on the two new students. This made it difficult for Boss Luo to connect with his university life. About a year ago, in his school life, there were only 2 students in his class. Most of the time, he was the only one in the class. Of course, at this time, Boss Luo basically didn't have the so-called awkwardness, and he didn't care about the eyes of the crowd. He thought for a while and said in fluent English that made the British students feel ashamed, from ancient times to the present, from the kings to the people, whether in academia, politics, education, even medicine, business and so on, as long as there are people, there will be the behavior of believing in God. There are so many behaviors of believing in God, that even we don't know clearly how many gods exist in the world. But from the modern scientific concept, we know that there is no God in the world, so what is God? Boss Luo's first sentence ended with the question at the beginning. He didn't seem to have answered anything. If there was no follow-up point, this kind of answer was probably naughty, at least the lecturer wouldn't like it. But Professor Poulin's face didn't show anything. He just suddenly raised the microphone and said, "God is a prophet, God is also a scholar." Luocchio smiled and said, "Is it because God always gives guidance in different subjects in different times? In the past, humans always called the areas that couldn't be explored, or perhaps they still didn't touch, God's forbidden zone. People thought that it was an area that mortals couldn't cross, and that those who stepped into God's forbidden zone would be punished by God. That's just the fear of nature at the stage of ignorance." This was a sudden sentence from a student in the classroom. It was an immediate question, not just because it was a classroom and the lecturer hadn't asked a question, so the student just listened. Boss Luo looked at the student. She had some small freckles on her face, wore half-rimmed glasses, and had a small braid. She looked very energetic. "What do you think God is?" Boss Luo looked at the female student and asked. She said without thinking, "God is just a concept, it's the spiritual incarnation of the people around us who are respected and respected by the public. This spiritual incarnation gives us a spiritual sustenance, and we naturally call this spiritual sustenance faith. So, God is actually just a kind of faith." It was a very official and very safe statement. Theologians were basically basing themselves on such notions, which were evidently infallible from the point of view of modern science. If God is a kind of faith, what do you think the specific manifestation of faith is? Boss Luo asked suddenly. Teacher Pu Lin blinked his eyes. He seemed to be interested in such a question. He was like an observer as he looked at the female student. The female student thought for a while and said, "Faith is a subjective product of the soul." Boss Luo shook his head. "Consciousness is something that we can't see or touch, it's illusory." The female student couldn't help but frown. Idols, myths, legends, biblical characters, totems. Boss Luo asked curiously, "If God is a kind of faith, the specific beliefs are idols, legends, totems and so on. Is the specific beliefs of God?" "Of course, humans believe in God. Would you believe in?" The female student opened her mouth. Besides belief in God, there was actually another direction of belief. For example, in real life there were also people who believed in devil, the opposite of God. Then, what do you think God is? The female student was silent for a while, then asked somewhat unwillingly. Boss Luo didn't answer the question directly, but thought for a while and said, "I don't mean to deny the idea of belief. In fact, everyone needs spiritual sustenance and belief, this is beyond doubt. Because people without belief have no moral bottom line and spiritual pursuit. Especially in today's society, most young people would feel bored, uninterested, depressed, and live like walking corpses. Even to the point of not knowing why they were alive, they wouldn't be able to get an answer. So, in this kind of group, it may be easier to produce God. No matter what they worship in the end, it can be regarded as a God, a spirit. This is not the God in theology." The female student pondered for a while and finally shook her head. She obviously didn't intend to agree with this point of view, but she didn't completely deny it. Theology and philosophy had always been unable to be completely separated. The theories of different schools were also entangled and mutually corroborated. So, God, in my opinion, is actually a person who has come through. Luocchio suddenly said at this time. He looked at Professor Poulin and gave a positive answer. God is a person who has come through, and also a prophet and scholar. God is a person who has come through, a prophet and scholar. They remembered that Professor Poulin suddenly said God is a prophet and scholar at the beginning. This freshman finally took the question back, after being interrupted by the female student. Of course, they weren't too surprised. After all, most of the students present had the attribute of being top students. They wouldn't easily admire a new student who had suddenly arrived, unless this new student had the ability to rely on his own ability to earn wealth that could crush them to death. Only then would he be worthy of admiration. If according to this statement, then people from the future become God when they come to the past? The male student in hip-hop clothing laughed at this time. As a person from the future, he knows too much knowledge and grasps too many trends. For people from the past, he is a prophet and also a great scholar. In the past era, people from the future are the greatest geniuses who can lead an era. First of all, you have to be sure that you can really grasp a lot of knowledge in a useful subject, and not a handicapped person who can only skillfully use modern tools but can't make it. The female student with a ponytail said coldly, "I've never seen a god who flaunts his personality." Ha 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 ha. This time, the laughter was obviously not low. The male student in hip-hop clothing didn't care at all. He shrugged and then pointed a finger at the female student. At this time, Professor Poulin simply clapped his hands a few times and the classroom became quiet again. He looked at the students and smiled. In fact, I don't know whether people from the present can become God when they go back to the past. After all, even Back to the Future Part 123 didn't tell me this. But Claudia is right about one thing. Even if you have the opportunity to go back to the past, to become a pioneer of an era, you do need a lot of knowledge and exquisite skills. It turned out that the name of the female student with a ponytail was Claudia. Professor Poulin was still talking. So for the possible time travel in the future, you have no reason not to cherish the opportunity to learn. Mark, can you stop texting? I'm sure your girlfriend doesn't like her boyfriend who only makes her happy when he's bored in class. The male student who had been named immediately opened his mouth with a stupefied look on his face. He felt that he had concealed it very well, so how on earth did this teacher Poulin find out? How could he even know that the person he was chatting with was his girlfriend? Damn it, there was another burst of low laughter. After that, the student named Mark hurriedly put away his mobile phone and opened the textbook, indicating that he wanted to listen carefully. Teacher Poulin brushed it off with a smile and then flipped open the teaching materials in his hand. All right, let's stop with the idle chatter. Let's continue where we left off in the previous class. The two new students, you can find me in the office after class. I'll provide you with a copy of the previous teaching materials. Now, please open the 36th page of the book. Today, we'll talk about the concept of Trinity. Boss Luo also opened the textbook. He was quite interested in Professor Poulin's understanding of the concept of Trinity. At this time, Miss Maid also opened the textbook. She put the textbook upright. This familiar routine made Boss Luo feel like he was back in high school. Without any accident, Miss Maid opened another thing besides the textbook, the recipe. Luochio was startled and didn't know whether it was a wise choice to ask her to come to school. At this moment, a female student sitting at the desk in front of Boss Luo suddenly turned her head and quickly put a small folded note in front of him. Luochio was startled and saw the female student pointing forward. She was pointing at Claudia's position. The note seemed to be from Claudia. Miss Maid obviously noticed these small movements and looked over. Boss Luo smiled and directly opened the note. Claudia wrote on the note, "If God is a person from the past, then can people from the future become God? Also, I want to know your contact information and name, Claudia." Luochio thought for a while, took a pen and wrote below the question. God is a person from the past, people are the future God. After writing, Boss Luo asked the female student in front of him to pass the note back, but he didn't leave his contact information and name. What a joke, Yu Yi is watching from the side. Although Miss Maid was very generous, considerate and sensible, Boss Luo still had this little bit of survival instinct. Chapter 1456. Well then, regarding the specific concepts of the Holy Father, the Holy Son, and the Holy Spirit, we'll leave it for the next class. Of course, if you're hardworking enough, I suggest that you understand these concepts in advance. Any other questions? The class was about to end. Teacher Poulin looked at the students in the class. Ever since he had asked a question about what exactly is God, Before class, he hadn't asked any other questions. Naturally, the entire class was much more depressing in comparison. Teacher! At this moment, Claudia directly raised her arm. This female student was probably the most studious student in this class. She always had so many questions. Even during class, she wanted to ask a few questions, but Teacher Pu Lin just ignored her. "What's your question, student Claudia?" Mr. Poulin probably felt that he couldn't ignore the past this time, so he had to face this inquisitive female student. "About the concept of Trinity. Is there only the three dimensions and the standard explanation that we use most often? I mean, apart from Holy Father, Holy Son, and Holy Spirit, is there nothing else that can reflect Trinity more?" Claudia directly stood up at this time. Mr. Poulin thought for a while. "Then what do you think? Apart from the conventional concepts, what else do you think there are? What else can there be?" Claudia directly said, "Past, present, future." Because the class had already ended, many students had already left their seats and were about to walk out of the classroom. Among them, even the club master and servant duo who wanted to experience this university cafeteria was included. But after hearing Claudia's words, Boss Luo and Miss Maid stopped one after another or almost stopped at the same time. Then, they looked back at this female student with a pigtail. Mr. Poulin frowned slightly at this time. He pondered for a while and then slowly said, "Student Claudia, may I ask why you have such an idea?" "It's because of the teacher's question and this new student's answer." When Claudia said this, she didn't even look at the new student, Boss Luo. Instead, she thought seriously. He said, "God is someone who came over and answered your question of prophet and scholar." Mr. Poulin thought for a while and put down the handbag in his hand, then made a gesture to continue. Claudia, who was encouraged, suddenly became spirited. If God is someone who came over, then in the past, humans are the future God. Past and future, only the present can connect them and form a complete timeline. So, could God perfectly unify the three elements of past, present, and future? Moreover, it doesn't only have these three elements, it should be able to embody these three elements all the time at this moment. Let's assume that during the second I spoke to your teacher, if there was a God, then at the same time, not only would it contain the past and present of my conversation with your teacher, it would also be able to directly show the result. That is, questions, discussions, and answers. The beginning, the end, and the process all appear at the same time. Mr. Poulin thought for a while and said, "Student Claudia, I think you should know that time flows. There is indeed a second between this second and the next second. We have a question first, then there will be an answer later. Let's assume that there is a problem at the same time as there is a problem, then do you think the problem itself is still a problem that needs to be solved? There is a situation where the beginning and the end exist at the same time, but there is actually a circle between them. The circle is the process between the beginning and the end." Claudia said, "But it is precisely because of this that God can be called omniscient and omnipotent, right? Just like how we observe a two-dimensional plane, whether it is the beginning or the end, we can see it at a glance. To two-dimensional beings, we are their God." Teacher Pu Lin shook his head and said, "But in reality, even if it's a two-dimensional plane, if it's vast enough to exceed our line of sight and live monitoring methods, we're still unable to see its beginning and end at the same time. Similarly, if there is a higher dimension above 3 dimensions, it may not have similar methods. Student Claudia, you have to know that when we observe a two-dimensional plane, we only observe the x and y axes of the plane, but if it is a three-dimensional plane, we still need to see its time axis. Moreover, future is a variable and has uncertainty. If future is already a known result, don't you think that the world you are living in is too scary?" Claudia quickly said, "Teacher, I am not a supporter of fatalism. I am just discussing whether there is a unity of past, present, and future." Teacher Pu Lin shook his head. I'm afraid it's a problem with quantum mechanics. If you're hoping that a theology teacher like me can answer your questions, I think you'll be disappointed, student Claudia. Teacher I. She didn't intend to give up and wanted to continue saying something. But Mr. Poulin waved his hand at this time. Student Claudia, I will think about your question. But I am sorry, it is time for me to get off work. And for the sake of your health, I suggest you go and enjoy your lunch. Okay. She knew she couldn't hold on anymore, so she had to give up. Mr. Poulin left the classroom. Before leaving, he glanced at Luaccio and Miss Maid, who stayed because of Claudia's question. He didn't speak, just nodded and left in a hurry. Wait a minute. Just when Boss Luo and Miss Maid were about to leave, Claudia hurriedly came up. She had just hung her bag on her shoulder and held a lot of books in her hands. This female student looked like a top student. At least she looked like this. What's the matter? Luaccio stopped and glanced at the names of the books in Claudia's hands. Claudia said, "What do you think? What do you mean?" Boss Luo blinked and asked with an attitude of knowing the answer. But Claudia didn't seem to care, or she didn't even notice. I just said that the unity of past, present, and future is Trinity. Student. Claudia, right? Luaccio smiled slightly. You can just call me Claudia, she answered quite straightforwardly. Her eyes were filled with a rather pure desire for knowledge. Boss Luo thought for a while and said, Claudia, before answering this question, can you tell me the reason why you are so eager? Claudia was startled. I don't quite understand what you mean. It's about the question itself, Luaccio said calmly. Or, why are you so eager to know another concept of Trinity? If I remember correctly, at the beginning, the God you thought of was actually a kind of faith, the spiritual sustenance of human beings, right? This. Claudia hesitated for a moment and then hurriedly took out a note from her bag. It was the note she passed to Luaccio during class. Of course, Boss Luo also wrote down a certain answer. Because of my answer? Luaccio suddenly became curious. He wasn't surprised that he had the ability to change others' thinking, but the key was that he never used this ability to directly change others' thinking. Yes. Claudia nodded seriously. After some thought, she said, Can we find a place to discuss this matter properly? Boss Luo glanced at Yu Yi, and the servant girl said directly, Why don't we go to the department? It's quieter there. The department that the servant girl referred to was naturally the activity room of the Butterfly Society, or rather the brand new lobby of the club. Is this really the new club that was just created yesterday? Even when she arrived at the Butterfly Society's office and sat on the sofa, Claudia still couldn't calm down the shock in her heart. This place looked like an antique shop with all kinds of expensive items. Even the retro sofa she was sitting on made Claudia feel that she was sitting on a fortune. Of course, she didn't really think that all the things here were expensive. What kind of club could have this kind of funding? Could it be that these two new students and founders were the prince and princess of a certain country? Maybe they were just replicas, but even so, it was obvious that a lot of effort was put into it. But was this club really just created yesterday? Unconsciously, in Claudia's eyes, these two new students were suddenly covered with a layer of mystery. Could it be that they were the royal family of a small country, or the young masters and young ladies of a tycoon? Claudia subconsciously became a little more reserved. Relax, Miss Claudia. Boss Luo smiled at this time. A relaxed mood is more conducive to your thinking and your decision. Claudia didn't notice the change in the way Luaccio addressed her. She was just curious about the so-called decision that Luaccio mentioned. She shook her head and remembered that she came for business, so she directly took something out of her bag. A notebook wrapped in cowhide. This is... Luaccio glanced at it curiously. It seemed that he was fated with books recently. This is my father's work notebook. It can be considered as his diary. Claudia explained, it's also the only thing he left behind after he disappeared. Boss Luo thought for a while and said, Who is your father? Claudia said, His name is Siegetu. He used to be a professor in this school of theology. Half a year ago. So, Miss Claudia, your father has been missing for half a year, right? Miss Maid brought tea and asked at the same time. She even used honorifics? Claudia finally felt that something was wrong. After serving tea, this unbelievably beautiful female student actually stood behind the male student like a servant? That's right. But she had to answer the question. I heard that teacher Poulin joined the club half a year ago. Miss Maid stood behind her master and said indifferently, It seems that he should take over your father's job, right? Claudia nodded silently again. The servant girl continued to say, Miss Claudia deliberately chose Boss Poulin's course. Or perhaps she deliberately chose the subject of theological studies. How do you know? Claudia was suddenly surprised. Luochio smiled and said, It's probably because Miss Claudia's books that I have such a guess. These are all books of the mathematics department. You're really observant. Claudia smiled bitterly. Indeed, I only applied for a theology degree this semester. I actually majored in mathematics research. Because of your father, Mr. Siegiatu. Luochio thought for a while and said, Do you think his disappearance is related to the school of theology? Claudia shook her head. I actually can't confirm anything. I only know that the last place my father stayed before he disappeared was his office. In fact, the police have investigated for a long time, but there was no progress. The reason why I applied for the theology course was to figure out some of the contents in the work notes left by my father. Look here. Claudia opened the work notes in front of the boss and Miss Maid, and directly turned to the last page with content. On the top were the words past, future, and present. The relationship between the words was a triangle, and the most common trinity composition was used. The word God was written in the center of each of them, followed by a big question mark. You said God is a person who came over, and then you answered me that man is the future God. Claudia stared at Boss Luo. Your point of view is very similar to what my father wrote in the end, very similar. Is that so? Luochio shook his head. If that's the case, I don't think we can help you with anything for the time being. Miss Claudia. Claudia was stunned. Boss Luo continued, After all, mutual help needs to be based on honesty. Of course, the same goes for the contract. I don't quite understand. Claudia was stunned. Boss Luo said indifferently, Take this notebook as an example. Miss Claudia, don't you think that if it's just a coincidence that my point of view is similar to some of the contents left by your father in the notebook, it's also something that I have no clue about? Claudia moved her lips and seemed a little dejected. Indeed, I was too reckless. Sorry to disturb you. She left as if she was interrupted. It's okay. Boss Luo smiled and said, One of the purposes of the establishment of Butterfly Society is to give people in need a place to talk. Unfortunately, we can't help you with anything this time, Miss Claudia. Of course, if you still need to talk, you're welcome to come at any time. Claudia walked to the door of the department in a daze. But the moment her palm touched the door handle, she suddenly turned around. Actually, I found something else. This time, she carefully took out a document bag from her bag. The thing inside seemed to be some kind of photocopy. Chapter 1457. In fact, if it was just a few words in the notes, it would be difficult to be a clue, especially when it was related to a missing person. But if there was something else, then the situation might be different. When Claudia took out a new document, Boss Luo and Mississippi Maid didn't seem to be too surprised. They quietly waited for Claudia to send the documents in the file bag. At this time, although Claudia had taken out the document, it could still be seen that she was still hesitating. She was hesitating whether she should tell them everything. Obviously, before this, she didn't even think that she would take out the things left by her father so easily. Even though she had already taken them out, she was still hesitating. This was the entire Butterfly Society department, but it seemed to have a strange magical power that made her uneasy heart gradually calm down. Perhaps it was fine to say everything. It was fine to say it here. It was probably this kind of thought. Even though it was strange, it didn't seem out of place. Her uneasy heart seemed to be quietly touched by a pair of hands and finally calmed down. Claudia finally spread the document in her hand on the table in front of Boss Luo. Actually, before my father disappeared, he was invited to participate in an archaeological activity. Claudia slowly said in a low voice. But I don't know what the archaeological team is investigating. From what I know, it seems that they have signed a confidentiality agreement. While Claudia was talking, Luocio curiously picked up the document on the table and looked at it. Obviously, this document was just a photocopy, and it was a photocopy of photos. Were these photos taken by your father when he participated in the archaeological work? Luocio suddenly asked. Claudia nodded. It should be. After my father finished the archaeological work, he locked himself in the study room or the studio day and night. These photocopies of photos are what he looked at the most. Miss Claudia, did your father say anything when he was studying these things? Miss Maid took the photocopies from her master's hand and glanced at them, then asked indifferently. Claudia shook her head. My father almost never discussed these things with me. He said that I couldn't talk to him. You know, I studied mathematics, but he studied theology. Did you see something? Miss Maid didn't speak at this time. She just put down the document in her hand and then gave Claudia a look to continue. I don't know what happened to my father. Claudia hugged her arms tightly. Sometimes he would become very strange. You know, he is a very gentle person, but he would suddenly become very irritable. There were a few times when I saw him smash the studio. In the end, he disappeared. Is the last words written in the notes directly related to these documents? Boss Luo thought and asked. Claudia nodded. I think so. I said that these are his work notes. In fact, you can flip to the front. There are some records of him studying these photos. It seems to be some kind of translation, but I can't understand it. But I think it might require theological knowledge, so I chose to minor in theology this semester. But unfortunately, I still can't understand what's written on it. Luocio glanced at the photocopies again. These photos are probably the contents of your father's archaeological work. If you think his disappearance is because of these things, have you thought about asking the members of the archaeological team at that time? In fact, I have already tried, but I failed. Claudia shook her head. Failed? Claudia nodded. I tried to contact some of the members of the archaeological team. In fact, I found the contact information from the email on my father's computer in the studio. There was only one of them. But in fact, when I searched according to the information in the email, I found that this person didn't exist at all. All I know is this person's nickname. Boss Luo suddenly had a flash of inspiration. This was a kind of sixth sense that was given to him by his supreme ability. Nickname? What kind of nickname? Golden Pupil, Claudia said after thinking about it. Golden Pupil. When he heard this name again, Luocio wasn't too surprised. He even looked so calm that Claudia didn't know that the name of Golden Pupil was actually related to this mysterious freshman in front of her many times. You really can't contact this Golden Pupil? Boss Luo asked again. Claudia nodded with certainty. I asked a classmate who's quite good at hacking to help me. He said that all of Golden Pupil's information is fake, and there's no way for him to find out the real information through email. Speaking up to this point, Claudia suddenly had a feeling of panic. She lowered her head, her body seemingly trembling slightly. What exactly is this archaeological team? What exactly are they investigating? Why did my father mysteriously disappear? The information he left behind, and the words in the notes, what exactly do they mean? These things appear in my mind every day. Many times, I made a lot of mathematical models to try to figure out the connection. But the more I think about it, the more I feel a sense of fear. Do you know? It's the kind of feeling where you feel like you're wrapped in some kind of darkness and can't breathe. Miss Claudia, this is Roselle tea. Drink it and you will feel better. Miss Maid suddenly reminded her. Thank you. When Claudia heard this, she picked up the blanket and took a small sip. Then, she smiled bitterly and said, Actually, I'm really not a mystical person. I've always been suspicious of mysticism because I believe that everything can be analyzed through science. But I really feel scared. I'm not afraid of anything mysterious, but there seems to be a great conspiracy behind it. Maybe your father just didn't have time to tell you anything. Boss Luo comforted her. Claudia sighed. Actually, for me at this stage, it might be best if there is no news about my father. At least, before I have concrete evidence, I don't have to conclude that he is dead. She finally let out a sigh of relief. She seemed to have relaxed a lot. Probably because she released some of her pressure after talking about her father. How about this, Miss Claudia? Luocio pointed at the things on the table and said, If you don't mind, can you let me make a copy of this information and some of the content in the notes? Claudia pondered for a moment and said, If you want, it's fine. In fact, I took a copy of this information to the police station. But now that half a year has passed, I think this information is probably at the bottom of the sheriff's desk. Thank you for your trust, Miss Claudia. Luocio nodded. Please don't worry, I will guarantee that this information will not be leaked from me unless there are special circumstances. Claudia tilted her head and looked at the two freshmen in front of her. She suddenly said, It's strange. Today is the first time we met, but we talked about so many things. And, I don't know why, but I feel that I can completely trust you. Boss Luo said seriously, This is the greatest compliment for us. Thank you, Miss Claudia. Claudia shook her head and laughed. I always feel that you two know each other like waiters in a 5-star hotel. Is it because of family education? Luocio smiled and didn't say anything. Claudia didn't choose to stay. In her words, her theology minor had already taken up a lot of her time. Although this didn't cause her to fall behind in her mathematics major, she didn't make much progress. Thus, she had no choice but to reduce her rest time to continue her mathematics studies. The lunch break was more important every day, so she didn't plan to waste it. Miss Claudia, if we find anything, we will definitely inform you immediately. Luocio and Miss Maid stood in front of the Butterfly Society department door and watched Claudia leave. After Claudia left the old school building where the Butterfly Society department was located, she ran directly on the campus path toward the cafeteria. Boss Luo finally withdrew his gaze from the department window. He turned around, and Miss Maid picked up the copies of the photos left by Professor Siegiatu again. Can you decipher it? Boss Luo suddenly asked. If Miss Maid couldn't decipher it, then he probably only had two choices. Learn how to decipher it himself or buy the information from the altar directly. This is a type of Sanskrit, master. Miss Maid played with her hair at this time, and it's a type of Sanskrit that isn't commonly used. The tribe that uses this Sanskrit should have no surviving descendants now. When Boss Luo heard this, he knew that the almighty Miss Maid didn't let him down again. When these photos are combined, it should be information like a mural. What does it say? Miss Maid took a pile of information and began to walk slowly in the department. She stopped from time to time and then wrote something on the blank paper with a pen. At this time, Boss Luo didn't disturb her. He just gave her a smile when she looked at him and showed a thoughtful expression. I've deciphered it, master. Suddenly, Miss Maid spun the pencil in her hand a few times between her fingers. Then, she raised her head and said with sparkling eyes, According to the information revealed by the words on these photos, the murals or slates behind the photos seem to record the information of the Acacia records. However, these photos are incomplete, so I can't be sure for the time being whether it was a mistake in the shooting or the original main body was missing so much information. You mean, Acacia record? Boss Luo frowned slightly at this time. Nowadays, there were not many things that could make him do this. Because the information in these photos is not complete, I can't be sure whether it's a simple introduction or a specific direction. Unless we can get the complete inscription. Miss Maid thought for a while and said, "Actually, it's enough to know this." Luocchio smiled slightly and said, "At least we have made progress from the beginning, right?" Miss Maid said softly, "Master, are you going to play the decryption game this time?" Boss Luo said, "Today is the first opening of Butterfly Society. So, let's have a big opening discount. So, beautiful lady, don't you want to have lunch with me?" "Of course." Miss Maid lifted the hem of her skirt and bowed slightly. His hands were clasped around his body, and his entire body was covered in a grayish ghost-like mass. At this moment, he was slowly floating in the university's dormitory. If any students or staff were to see him, they would probably be shocked, because it not only looked like a ghost, but also stuck out its long tongue like a hanged ghost. For the time being, it was better to call this clump-like thing the Spectre Nero. It was spat out by Nero, and in the end, it followed teacher Pu Lin to the university campus. But in fact, a ghost Nero didn't really enter the university. At this time, it could only wander in a limited number of buildings. This university had a long history and had been expanded several times. Its real interior was the seminary and some other ancient subject. These areas seemed to be protected by something, making Ghost Nero unable to get close. Of course, it was only because Spectre Nero was just a breath of air exhaled from Nero's body. It had no power at all. If it was Nero's original body, it probably wouldn't be stopped by this strange power. This was because even in the eyes of the Spectre Nero, this strange force that was blocking it was not very powerful. Could not break through it. It was only because Nero was too stingy that it was so weak. "Don't wander here anymore. You will scare the students here." Suddenly, Teacher Poulin's voice appeared behind Ghost Nero. It turned around and saw Teacher Poulin carrying a bag. It didn't know when he had arrived. Ghost Nero was even more mischievous than Miss Nero. At this moment, it pulled its eyelids and made a face. "It's none of your business." Teacher Pu Lin shook his head. "This school has some kind of protection. It's very difficult for ordinary ghosts and the like to get close. It'll also continuously consume your strength. You won't be able to maintain your invisible state very soon. You'll scare people. Come with me." As he spoke, he didn't care whether Ghost Nero agreed or not. Pu Lin directly walked forward. Chapter 1458. Later, Mr. Poulin came to a bench on the campus and sat down. In front of him was a grassy lawn. Students sat in twos and threes on the lawn and chatted. There would be students passing by or school gardeners greeting Mr. Poulin. Of course, he always responded politely. There were obviously many people who knew him, but no one stopped to talk to him. Perhaps some female seminary students with ulterior motives were the exception. He sat alone and ate the bread and coffee he bought from the convenience store. Of course, in reality, he wasn't the only one, because beside Teacher Pu Lin, there was something that ordinary people couldn't see. Spectre Nero. Eating alone is the first level of loneliness. Ghost Nero looked like he had seen through the world. A thick beard even grew out of his chin. "Why do you look like this?" Mr. Poulin looked at Ghost Nero curiously. "What's the problem?" Ghost Nero blinked. Teacher Pu Lin shook his head, then thought for a while and said, "Ever since I first met you, you seem to be constantly changing your appearance. You seem to be afraid of being fixed in a certain appearance. Are you afraid of letting others know you, or are you afraid of being familiar with a certain appearance of yourself?" Ghost Nero slowly floated to the front of Teacher Pu Lin, blocking his line of sight. At the same time, it showed a ghost face and said, "Mr. Death, I'm not a character that can be captured in 18x games. Even if you capture me, there won't be any strange CG happening." However, Teacher Pu Lin suddenly laughed. Probably because he felt happy or something like that, right? What is the second level of loneliness? He suddenly asked. Ghost Nero narrowed his eyes and said, being in a daze. Mr. Poulin asked curiously, why is your classification of loneliness different from others? Isn't it common to be in a daze alone? Ghost Nero said, so this is the loneliness of the second season, Mr. Grim Reaper. Isn't the classification of ordinary people what people are doing every day, repeating it over and over again, and unknowingly becoming accustomed to it? Then what is the highest level of loneliness? Mr. Poulin asked more curiously. Ghost Nero was silent for a moment. When it was about to speak, a white palm suddenly appeared in the air, grabbed it directly and even crumpled it into a ball. The real Nero appeared. Right in front of Teacher Poulin, Nero stuffed the crumpled Spectre Nero into her mouth and swallowed it in one gulp. Only then did she greet Teacher Poulin. Yo! Death, Appa, are you satisfied with my chat service? It's free this time. Mr. Poulin glanced at Nero and then said indifferently, it seems that you have found what you are looking for. In addition, I'm not a death. You can call my name, Poulin. And then I'll call you Poulin Appa, okay. Nero sat down next to Mr. Poulin at once. She almost squeezed into Mr. Poulin's arms, but the actual situation was that a layer of membrane-like thing naturally appeared on her body, completely isolating the direct contact between the two sides. Mr. Poulin couldn't feel the softness of this body as usual. Instead, it was like being slapped by a piece of iron plate. His body had to tilt to one side directly. What a mischievous fellow. But this is merely one of the many facets of her personality, Teacher Poulin thought to himself. He immediately shifted his body and sat down properly again. Nero acted as if nothing had happened. She began to rummage through the food bag that Mr. Poulin put on the stool. The food in the bag, then she tore open the packaging of a donut and ate it by herself. Delicious! She would probably be beaten to death, if she really had friends. Mr. Poulin glanced at it. At this time, he was not curious about the answer that Ghost Nero did not give. Instead, he asked, are you going to stay here in the afternoon? Nero shrugged and said, I don't know. But don't worry, Poulin Appa, I won't fight with you again for a short period of time. Because there's still an old hag of unknown origin nearby. I can't be sure whether or not he'll sneak attack me from behind. Old Ha, who is it? Mr. Poulin frowned, showing a puzzled expression. Nero said without thinking, Old Ha is Hades. Don't you know? Didn't he say that he is your brother? Mr. Poulin stared at Nero without blinking at this time. Nero, who noticed Mr. Poulin's gaze at this time, also turned her head and stared at him without blinking. After a while, Nero suddenly opened her mouth and swallowed the remaining donut directly. She widened her eyes and said, Poulin Appa, it seems that you really don't know? Mr. Poulin frowned and said, if I remember correctly, you have mentioned the name Hades once in the morning. So, when you mentioned this name in the morning, it was not because you felt that my ability was similar to King of Hell, but some kind of test, right? Nero suddenly clapped her hands and said with a smile, Poulin Appa, you are so powerful. You are really a smart child. Teacher Poulin said sternly, you keep mentioning Hades in front of me. Why in the end? Nero crossed her legs and said, Poulin Appa, do you really not know that a guy who calls himself Hades has been following you? Mr. Poulin shook his head slowly. If someone is following me, it is impossible for me not to notice it. N? Nero blinked, then suddenly asked, Poulin Appa, is it convenient to reveal how you got your ability? Mr. Poulin couldn't help showing a caring look when he looked at Nero at this time. He even said hesitantly, your brain is really okay? Forget it if you don't want to say it. Nero directly stuck out her tongue at Mr. Poulin. If you don't tell me, I will tell Joe and the others. They, in fact, died half a year ago. These sudden words caused Teacher Poulin's gaze to instantly become fierce. A cold gust of wind suddenly blew over from the lawn. It was clearly a warm afternoon, but it made the students who were resting on the lawn subconsciously shiver. Mr. Poulin's eyes gradually returned to calmness. After calming down, he said so calmly, "This is my innate ability. Is there any other problem?" "No, thank you." Nero shrugged, then suddenly jumped up from the chair. The moment she jumped up, she even pulled out a long sword from her elbow, Yamato. At this time, Nero was holding Yamato and gestured to the schoolhouse behind the chair. Mr. Poulin frowned at first, but found that Nero didn't want to fight. He couldn't help but be surprised. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to cut off the guardian of this schoolhouse," Nero said matter-of-factly at this time. "If I don't cut it off, what if Ghost Nero still can't enter next time? I'm very afraid of trouble." Of course, the sooner the trouble is solved, the better. Mr. Poulin found that he really couldn't keep up with the thoughts of this strange white-haired girl, but he was quite sure that if he didn't stop her, this white-haired girl would really slash at the schoolhouse. The guardian of this schoolhouse has always been there. It is not targeted at anyone. It is just to protect students from encountering any supernatural disasters when they are studying. Mr. Poulin shook his head and said, "Ghost Nero, right? In fact, as long as you strengthen it a little, it can easily penetrate it. Why destroy something that has always existed for such a small thing?" "I don't care. I'm a bad kid now." Nero covered her ears with one hand and stuck out her tongue like a spoiled child, but at the same time, she raised Yamato. Teacher Poulin's gaze froze. He knew that he couldn't stop the other party with words. He almost didn't think too much. With a flip of his palm, that black book with a leather cover, the Devil's Bible, appeared directly in his palm. It was said that they didn't intend to fight, but it seemed that if things continued this way, they would have no choice but to fight again in the end. Teacher Poulin's eyes gradually lost their lively color and his pupils contracted. His gaze gradually became cold and desolate. Unexpectedly, at this moment, Nero suddenly widened her eyes, then she looked like she saw a ghost. She suddenly put down the Yamato that was raised high, and she even showed a trace of panic in front of Mr. Poulin. This made Mr. Poulin adjust the Devil Bible that he was about to open, but he stopped halfway. At this time, Nero, who put down the Yamato in her hand, suddenly hid the Yamato behind her back, as if a child who had done something bad suddenly met her parent, so she hid the bad thing. But she found that it was too unsafe to hide behind her like this, so there was such a scene. Nero directly opened her mouth in front of Mr. Poulin and swallowed the Yamato bit by bit, starting from the blade. In the end, she patted the remaining hilt hard and finally swallowed the whole Yamato completely. Then she showed an embarrassed smile. "Poulin Appa, I will play with you again when I have time, bye-bye." She flew directly into the sky, then blasted away, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. It seemed that she was scared by something. Mr. Poulin closed his palm, and the Devil Bible finally disappeared in his palm. He stood up and looked back at the school building behind him. A trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. Could it be that, in this school building, in addition to the thing that releases the protective enchantment, there is something special? This thing can even scare this strange, white-haired girl so much that she doesn't dare to stay? After several encounters with Nero, although he couldn't completely understand the character of this white-haired girl, Mr. Poulin could already be sure of one thing. That was, this strange white-haired girl must be the kind of person who was not afraid of anything. "This is really strange," Mr. Poulin muttered to himself. There was another thing that Nero mentioned just now. There was always a guy who called himself a Hades by his side. Unknowingly, the lunch break quietly passed by while Mr. Poulin was puzzled. Seeing that the afternoon class was about to begin, Mr. Poulin had to withdraw his thoughts and quickly walked toward the classroom. After he left, at the foot of the chair, a small figure slowly walked out. It was a black cat. At this time, the black cat was following behind Mr. Poulin, walking slowly. But the strange thing was, whether it was the students or the staff on the road, it seemed that they couldn't see this black cat. Even Mr. Poulin himself didn't seem to notice the black cat behind him. Finally, Teacher Poulin entered the classroom. This was another grades course, so during this period, Teacher Poulin didn't run into the two new students who had just entered the seminary. Quiet, get ready for class. He looked at these senior students and calmly said. Nero fled very far away. She almost fled to the seaside before landing on the edge of the beach. Then, she patted her chest. As the former divine general of the Michael Club, Teacher Poulin's understanding was correct. Nero indeed had a fearless personality. Even among the 26 seats of the Michael Club back then, as a tyrant, Nero had a headache most of the time. But that was then and this was now. The owner of the club and the 26 seats of the club were two completely different creatures. Nero was not afraid of anything, but the owner of the house and Miss Maid were horrible people who could turn the sky upside down casually. So close, so close. I almost got slashed down. At this time, Nero was lying on the beach with her arms and legs spread out, looking at the changing clouds in the sky. In fact, if she really destroyed the school's guardian with one strike, the master inside would definitely not say anything. No matter what, he could tolerate her prank, and it was not because of sympathy or anything else. This was the reason why Nero was willing to stay with her current master. The key was that if she slashed down, it wouldn't make the owner angry, but it would definitely make the servant girl angry. She wouldn't tell you when she was angry. She would look at you with a smile when she was angry. Then, she might suddenly attack you. That would be horrible. Nero was not afraid of pain, hardship, or tiredness, but she was super afraid of trouble. She hadn't finished copying the books for more than 200,000 times. Ayaya. So, which one is the one lying? The clouds in the sky were still thousands. She was just like an innocent girl, showing a troubled expression.